All right. Thank you guys for joining for another Mixed Mental Arts chat session. And we have a couple people here. And also, I just got a message from the infamous Ed Kennedy. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I tweet him out a join link so he can join us on this discussion. But as far as who we have here now, there's, of course, myself, Dusty Cubes, aka the Woke Centrist. And could you also introduce yourself, Hunter?
Hi, my name's Hunter Mott.
Uh-oh, we had a little bit of robot problem there.
Oh, sorry. Hi, my name's Hunter. I the mixed mental arts podcast. I think you could probably call me the unwoke, or at least and work for sort of shared.
All right, let's make sure we're good here. Were you able to hear that, D. Canfield?
No, Hunter, your internet's terrible.
Shit.
Uh-oh. Well, while Hunter sorts that out, I know D just kind of left his screen.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm D. Canfield. I work on the Mixed Mental Arts team. I do some funny graphics and such, and work on the website. And I guess what's the topic tonight? Congress?
Yeah, we're just going to talk about Congress, what it is, what does it do, and
Well,
how fucked up it is.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to trashing politicians across the board.
All right, great. So I did send out a link to Mr. what many know as Sam's Bulldog. Ed Kennedy should be joining us shortly. All right. So just to start off, what is Congress? So just for those people who may not be super familiar with our American Congress, I just wanted to go and just do a little bit of education about what Congress is. Now, before I have my input, did you guys want to say anything about what exactly is Congress?
Give us a quick rundown, and then we'll jump in.
All right. So in the American system of government, there's three branches. We have our judicial branch, the executive branch, and our branch that we get our legislation from, which is Congress. So our judicial branch is there to uphold the law in which Congress writes and the executive branch signs off on. So what the congressmen, we have two bodies of Congress. One would be the Senate, in which each state gets equal representation within that congressional body. And then we have the House of Representatives, which is dependent on population to some extent in regards of the representation of each state. And what that body is supposed to do is come up with legislation, preferably collectively, present that to the president, and the president signs that legislation into law, which the judiciary branch upholds. So
hey,
it
Justin,
is
I
one.
have a question.
Sure.
Why do we have three branches of government? Wouldn't it be so much more efficient if we only had one branch of government that could just quickly make decisions?
It would be extremely efficient, but it'd also be probably extremely corrupt. Because what we have, why we have the three branches is this concept called the balance of powers. So each of those powers are balanced by playing off each other and needing each other to function correctly. This places power out of the hands of one single entity and it's mainly to, I guess, keep us from becoming an authoritarian ruled country, and makes sure that the people have a lot of power in deciding how our government works.
It's to keep Trump in line.
Yeah, is to keep everybody in line, for some respects. Even though there are problems with it, each of these branches, including the judiciary branch, but it's our system of trying to be less corrupt than other systems.
So, like, do you think that we need these people at all anymore?
What do you mean?
I mean, there's a bunch of people who we elect to make decisions for us, and those people are generally paid off, and they make decisions that aren't always the ones that we would choose. Actually, I mean, if you look at like Lessig's numbers, it's that number is way too high to even comprehend. But wouldn't it be better that the people who actually care about the decisions that are being made voted on the decisions as they come?
You mean within the context of individual aspects of governance?
Yeah, like a bill comes down.
So like direct democracy then. Like individual citizens decide on specific policies that should be enacted for government's sake,
Yeah,
or for the people's sake.
yeah, let's say like at the end of the month on a Saturday or something, you get like a bunch of stuff that's being passed, and you vote on each thing. Maybe you have 10 things, and you check off which one you choose.
That's already instituted all across America, local and state levels.
Well, not exactly what I just said. I mean, the question is why do we need these people at all?
Why do we need representatives for government at the level of Washington, D.C. is the question.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to do every minutia of government that is necessary to run the United States, or even, have to learn, how much the federal government should give corn farmers in Nebraska on a monthly basis.
So couldn't you have like um, some people that with limited authority who you elect from time to time to do things, but who really have to actually answer to the people on big choices?
You mean like Congress?
No, like actually somebody who, when it comes to a big choice like maybe raising or lowering a tax, or something like that, the person, the representative, would actually have to go to the people for their say. So you're not actually.
Well, that's the point. That's the point of having 2-year terms in the House of Representatives, is that the House of Representatives is supposed to be the power is supposed to rest within the people alone.
It's so that it's supposed to, but when they're allowed to get bribed, then there's clearly an issue with that system. So there needs to be an additional check on those representatives. If we're going to say it's okay to bribe representatives, which is basically what we're saying, then shouldn't there be like another check on that?
Hunter, were you going to say something?
Or alternatively, yeah, we reform the system, because the whole problem is that you basically now have one branch, which is this collusion between the uber wealthy and the government. You need to have electoral reform, but the point is that the checks and balances are broken down. Doesn't mean that you remove checks and balances. It means you need better checks and balances.
Right.
Because if you think about how, I mean, Congress has a tough enough time keeping itself informed. Like, most congressmen didn't even read the Affordable Care Act. So if they're not going to read that 1,000-page document, looking at the American populace as it is today and its current levels of education, fractured attention, lack of time makes you think that suddenly, the American public is going to be like, this is amazing. Let's read this 1,000-page turgid document with vocabulary that most of us don't understand.
I don't actually. I think the people who care about those specific things will vote on them. People who haven't bothered to read them won't vote on them.
Well, I think there's a reason why they don't read those entire documents, because they're only really interested in their personal contribution to the bill. So as long as whatever they're contributing to that bill is not countered by something else, they pretty much don't care too much about whatever else is in the bill.
Yeah, I mean, what did that guy just say? That he only responded to the people who donate to his campaign, and the lobbyists who didn't donate, he just didn't listen to. I mean, I'm sure that's not just him.
Well, that's an endemic problem within all of Congress, including the Senate, and I think the issues with money coloring speech is not the same issue of having representative government. I think representative government isn't a bad thing. I think that having speech and money be equal, or having money be considered to be free speech, is a problem.
I mean, if they're voting, if Congress is voting completely contrary to the view of the American public, how is it not a problem?
But it's what the problem is, and the problem is that you have an unrepresentative democracy, not the principle of representative democracy. So if you want to fix the problem, and this is Lessig's point, is then you should get the Congress to be representative of the people, and that was what Madison laid out way back when, back in the day, when he was saying that the government should be dependent on the people alone. So the problem isn't the principle of representative democracy; it's that democracy in America is unrepresentative.
Yeah, like the House of Representatives has two huge problems as far as I can see. One is the lobbyist money. Two is let's say three problems. So lobbyist money. Two is lack of term limits, and three is the apportionment issue. So far as there hasn't been a reallocation of House of Representatives seats since 1914, I think, 1912 or 1914, and because of that, you have a situation in which literally a magnitude of 15 people, 15 times more people live in California than live in like Wyoming, or even 50 times more. I don't know the exact, like there's 40 million people in California and there's some 600,000 people who live in Wyoming. Why does the effective representative count for California equal less or more than?
We're getting into why the Electoral College is stupid, right?
Well, that's a whole different issue altogether. And the Electoral College isn't stupid per se. It's just not necessarily reflective of how federal elections would be efficiently run.
Of course it's stupid. One person should get one vote. The idea that like
having one executive do all the things is stupid.
Listen, you get one.
That's a completely different thing. Congress is a different thing.
You're a civilian in America. You get the same vote as somebody else. Why should you live in North Dakota and your vote be twice as powerful as somebody who lives in like New York? That's just absurd.
I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, you have to look at the interests of the individual versus the interests of individual states, which are different. So the interests of
within your state, you have all the voting, legislation, and everything you can do within your own state. I mean, the idea that like you need more power on a federal level because you live in a place with less people is silly.
And that's
Go ahead, Hunter. Hunter?
I think you might be having some internet issues.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, to go along
Yeah.
with what you're
I-
go ahead, Hunter.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, that's the whole point. D is that what we want is we want a more representative democracy, but you know, the reality is that, you know, how do you deal with any sort of collective bargaining situation, right? It's not just that we have. I mean, I just think that, you know, the technology makes direct democracy possible, but the question is, I mean, I think at the current state of affairs, and obviously, you know, my life is devoted to making people more educated, but at the current state of affairs, I wouldn't say that most of us are well informed enough to be able to make direct democratic decisions. Like if you put the Affordable Care Act in front of me, you know, and made me wade through those 1,000 pages, I don't know how long it would take me to figure it out. And if I had to do that for every single piece of legislation, I mean,
Yeah, but
you know, would I really have time to pay my bills or, you know, figure out anything else?
yeah, I mean, maybe that's true, but I think there are big issues that affect everybody day to day that aren't necessarily allocation of funds or like issues with procedural issues and like there's obviously small things that happen on a day-to-day basis, but then there's things like gun control, where like you have 70% of the country who wants, some sort of at least a national background check and a gun registry, and yet you can't have it because you have a powerful lobby. I mean that's just absurd, and if you had people vote online, that would be passed tomorrow. If you could vote online, like marijuana would already be legalized. It wouldn't be this stupid, dragging along this old broken system, So I mean, I understand like that's true. We couldn't have people. I mean, we couldn't have direct voting for every tiny little issue, but I think there are big ones that we should maybe think about taking out of the hands of people who are bribed.
So what you're asking for is a constitutional convention, which is like I would agree with you that the way that Congress works is shitty, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to live in a country where people in New York are deciding what's right, what policies should be enacted for people in Kansas.
I do.
But that's because you're a New Yorker.
Yeah, I know, but I'm also a Federalist. So
my family's from Kansas, and I'm telling you, they're not gonna like those New York City values.
Yeah, but there's but listen, there's also there's also laws that do reside within the state, and I think like that's one of the reasons that you can't like ban guns. I mean, in New Jersey, you can't have a gun in New Jersey, and if you do, if you want to carry, you have to be so secretive that no one ever even knows you have one, and like that just can't work in every state. And you're naive if you think it will work in every state. So like something like that, it does vary from state to state. So like I get that. But something like a gun registry, a national gun registry, like I don't care if they don't like it.
Well, but see, D, that's the problem, is that you don't care if they don't like it. What if they pass something that they don't care that you don't like it?
I don't care.
Like, what if they ban abortion?
If 70% of the country wants it, then shove it down my throat. That's the best thing for the country.
Oh, so you advocate for pure majority rule on all things.
What issue are they going to bring up where 70% of the country wants to vote for it? Let's say if you get 3/4 or like whatever, I mean, I can't see a scenario where I'm the 25% pushing back against something the rest of the country wants. I mean,
Israel?
What do you mean? You think the American public, 75% of the American public wants Israel?
Let's ask Dr. Google.
But yeah,
Regardless, D, even if you want to enact that sort of, like, if you want a second constitutional convention, you want to implement more direct democracy through the internet, you still have to get 2/3 of the public to agree on things to be able to even make that possible, or 3/4, whatever it takes to call a constitutional convention. So, you're still left with the problem of, getting the American public on the same page, which is the core challenge. Like, it's getting people focused.
but isn't
And,
it's not 3/4 of the
I
American
mean,
public. It's 3/4 of the American public who want to participate, and I think that's important.
yeah, well, I mean, it's still a big challenge. And personally, I will tell you that there's a reason why we don't have, simple majority rules, and it's because you can end up with the majority practicing a tyranny over the minority, in the sense that, let's imagine that the majority, wanted to ban homosexuality, or the majority wanted to, make Christianity the dominant religion in schools and everything else, and said this was a Christian nation and whatever. Well, I'm glad that there are checks and balances so that 70% of the country can't shove that down anybody's throats. But, I think my big issue here is that I hear a lot of solutions to these sorts of problems, like anarcho-capitalism or whatever it is, that are basically just some sort of fantasy solution that avoid the basic problem of us forming some sort of shared consensus, which is the real work, which is to actually get into the issues and hash out some sort of agreement with people with whom we disagree.
But isn't that really what this is all about, and why we have a constitution in the first place? Like, we have a constitution so that the things that you just mentioned aren't on the table. And so, like, you have this list of things that you can't infringe upon, and then you let the majority rule from there, and that way you don't have crazy things like the things you just mentioned.
What's Article 1 of the Constitution, Daryl?
What?
What's Article 1 of the Constitution?
Are you talking about the First Amendment? Is that what you're
No, Article 1 is the Congress. The entire article lays out the roles of Congress. Article 2 lays out the roles of the executive branch, and Article 3 lays out the role of the judiciary. It's a tripartite.
You got me.
It's a tripartite governmental structure. Everyone has their role. So within that, having everyone have their role allows the U.S. government to have checks and balances in order to execute the majority rule as it comes up. And it's set up so that there's not big revolutionary change often. Now, big revolutionary change can happen when the people alone choose to elect representatives to enact that change. Like, look at this is a unique situation that I'm going to bring up, but look at the Congress of 1866 to 1868, right? So that Congress passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, right? Because basically half the country was kicked out because of the Civil War, because of traitors, to the flag of the United States, saying we're going to have an armed insurrection. That said, the structures that are laid out in the Constitution were there in order for those congressmen to enact completely sweeping constitutional changes, which led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And there were even more being asked by that Congress of the government that were held in check by President Johnson. So you can't just look at all these things in the vacuum of saying, 70% of the American populace wants some sort of gun control. Okay, what kind of gun control? Who's going to go and look at all the details of what that gun control is going to have? Who's going to check the constitutionality on the 1st, 2nd through 10th Amendment to ensure that that law is constitutional.
All right. First of all, you know it's constitutional, and second of all, I didn't say just ban guns. I said at least I said 70% wants at least a background check and a national gun registry.
I didn't say ban guns. I said some sort of gun control.
Right, but then you said what kind of gun control? I said
what
exactly,
kind of gun control is the question.
I said
so
exactly.
So then you have to have lawyers write out the law.
No, you don't. You just never have it happen because the NRA has such a powerful lobby on our Congress that it doesn't work. And so
ban the NRA and keep Congress.
So you could talk about like how wonderful the checks and balance system is, but like it doesn't work. So the question is like, what's the move forward?
So why doesn't it work?
Is the problem the
I can't hear you, Hunter. Sorry.
Hunter, go ahead.
why? So
Hunter, can you hear me?
never mind.
So it goes. So the point that I'm getting to, Daryl, is that to me, it's not what you're bringing up. One has a lot of righteous indignation in it, which is completely understandable. But secondarily, it's looking at a branch of tyranny and trying to cut off the branch without hacking at the root, as Lessig says.
So we spend $700 trillion on a military budget that the American people, I don't think, believes that we should have. But we have it because a bunch of rich people that we elect want it. But we should keep having it because of the sanctity of checks and balances.
Okay. Tell me how to get rid of it.
Direct democracy.
So you're saying that direct democracy is going to get rid of the military-industrial complex?
It would cut
when
military
when there's billions of people who are employed by the defense industry.
Yeah, I know. We have to fire like a quarter of them tomorrow, in my opinion. But I understand what you're saying.
And then you're going to have people rioting in the streets.
Wonderful. Like, get a job, you know? You pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
The arguments that you're making are so completely myopic.
They're
myopic.
At all. What is the move forward to progress? I don't care about musing about how wonderful the system is.
I'm not saying that the system is wonderful.
How do you fix it?
How do you fix it? You get money out of the politics.
By?
Because if you're saying direct democracy, then you're basically saying, all right, let's keep all the structural issues that are there.
You want to hear what's funny? You want to know what's really funny? The money, turning something into a direct democracy does not address the money issue. We will still be influenced by our media and who controls, moneyed influences, commercials, et cetera, et cetera. That still doesn't.
Talking about bribing politicians.
Well, I would in a minute take a bribe to sell my vote to vote against whatever policy you want.
Yeah, like that doesn't stop people who want to bribe just regular citizens, or at least influence them with their money through the media or whatever means.
Are you saying they actually have to pay individual citizens for a vote?
Regardless, yes.
Amazing.
That's what they did in Greece in antiquity.
Do they also have to do things that cater to our needs?
No, I'm just saying, regardless, bribery will continue. That's what I'm saying. My thing is to get rid of the bribery.
My point is that it's better that they bribe the American public than to bribe a select group of politicians.
They already bribed the American public.
Yeah, it's called commercials.
and it's called tax breaks, and it's called all. There's so much corruption in the system because.
So what is the move forward? What does get money out of politics mean? You think the people who are in politics, these representatives that we're talking about, are just going to decide tomorrow?
Okay, so
the system that puts money in their pocket?
So let's try and slow down and redirect, okay? Because this is so obtuse and so in the weeds that it's like there's no way to address it, because you're talking about destroying or dismantling the military industrial complex without even talking about what the military industrial complex is or why it exists in the forefront.
I want you to answer the question I just said. What is the move forward? What is your how do you think we get money out of politics, since that's obviously the issue?
That's not obviously the issue. That's the problem, is that it's so much more complex and pernicious than simply money in politics or gerrymandering or, you know, misallocation of representation for the House of Representatives.
You listen to those Lessig podcasts, and what you come out of is money.
I met the fucking guy last week. I talked to him for an hour and a half.
And also, point is there's a series of issues. It's not just money, it's gerrymandering, election reform, all of that, to make a more representative democracy. But in order to do that, the challenge is to make the public around. You can gang up on Congress, and of course that's Lessig's whole point is that the people in Congress currently don't want to do that because they like the game the way that it is.
Super robot problem.
I think super robot.
I think the main thing is that people are so distracted at the presidency that they don't look at Congress at all, and I think that's a big problem.
I think that's nonsense.
Why is it nonsense?
Because you're not. If you want to actually solve the problem, you have to have a solution. You have to.
What is the problem?
Have a solution, and saying that we should just what's the move forward to magically have the same system and just hope that it changes?
What's the problem, Daryl? That's the issue, is that I think you're not even looking at what the right problem is.
What's the problem?
Yes.
What's the problem with the American democracy right now?
What's the problem with the American governmental system writ large, not just the democracy?
The problem is that we're bombing Yemen and the American people don't support
it. Those are downstream effects. Why are we bombing Yemen and people are not supporting it? Oh, you went away. I think
we're not bombing Yemen.
We're kind of bombing
indirectly. Indirectly.
Well, that's not us. We are not bombing Yemen.
The Saudis are bombing Yemen, and we're giving them the bombs.
Big difference.
It's not really all that big of a difference. It's kind of a shit show.
It is a shit show. Agree with you there.
It's a global chess game that I know nothing about, so I won't comment on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the problem with people are they just get lost in the weeds too easily. Like, you know, they're more focused on Stormy Daniels than, you know, how dysfunctional Congress is. And I know a lot of people, like, just by reading Lessig's book, like, a lot of people are very unhappy with Congress writ large. And you just think of any type of media coverage, like, how much does it cover Congress really? Not too much. There is C-SPAN, but nobody watches C-SPAN.
Yeah. I think the issue with Congress is deeper and more pernicious than just the question of, you know, the American people want this. Why isn't it happening? We should have direct democracy. I think that's a very rudimentary way of looking at things, because people are not going to, who knows what the fuck's going on in Yemen? Most people don't. So the question becomes, how do we tell the government to get people out of Yemen? It's the same way whether or not we have direct democracy or a representative democracy. You have to have people get involved. And it's extremely difficult in that manner. And with Congress, it's always going to be a situation in which the speed of government is going to be slower than the speed of people changing their minds, which is good because that means that if the people change their minds to saying, oh, we want war in Yemen now, or, oh, we want to go and bomb North Korea for some reason, it's not going to happen overnight.
Unless it's 9/11.
And even then, it took a whole month. And there was only one congressperson who voted against the authorization of use of military force.
Yeah,
And
it was a black lady, right?
yeah, from Oakland, I think.
Yeah, she caught a lot of hell for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and she turned out to be, or actually, no, she caught a lot of hell for the Iraq War. I think it was the Iraq War that she caught a lot of hell for. I don't remember.
Yeah, I know it had to do with
the specifics.
it was a specific like bill that was related to funding, or it was related to presidential war powers.
Yeah, Barbara Lee. Barbara Lee is the specific one. Yeah, she did catch a lot of hell for it. Turns out she was kind of right.
Yeah, it's crazy what emotion does to people. Like, it's slow thinking is something real that people have to do, especially during times like 9/11. I know there were a lot of voices rigorously against going to war at that time, but you know, it's hard to break away from the emotional distraught people that were attacked and just kind of, it's just the retribution type nature that people have. And I don't know if it's an American thing or just a human thing.
Also, I'm sorry for scaring, or not scaring, but basically berating Daryl off. That wasn't my intention. I don't know. Here's the thing that I see the biggest issue with talking about government is that I see people hacking at the branches of evil, but nobody's hacking at the roots. That's the problem. Is that the whole point of the Constitution is to not have a check on government per se, but have a check on human nature as was displayed in the culture of the people who wrote the document, which was under a monarchy, you know? So if we're gonna say, oh, we should throw out the entirety of Article 1 to the Constitution, you're basically looking at the document and saying that having that part of the Constitution is completely useless.
Yeah.
And then you might as well say that having an executive branch is completely useless, and having a judiciary is completely useless, and we should just have everything done by majority rule. That's not how things. I'm not
the
going to say
majority
that's not how things work, but
I understand. Like, the majority of people aren't lawyers and can like really understand the law. So it's, even if it was majority rule, there would be a small amount of influencers, whatever that influence may be monetarily. Like, you only need to target a very small amount of people if it were majority rule. So,
and that's what they do in New York and have for the last 150 years, is that they pay small business owners and they pay like individual community members to go out and vote for this specific, thing. They literally, people who are lobbying for it go and lobby individuals. And I don't think that's any better than having, lobbying in Congress.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people also have to know too, is that it's not just, big corporations that are lobbying the government or officials in Congress. There's also officials in Congress who sit on certain committees that call specific corporations and say, hey, look what committee I'm on. Wouldn't it be your best interest to give me some campaign funds? So it goes both ways. It's officials can torque the lever on corporations depending on what committees they oversee or what sunset provisions are within their realm of voting. So if you have like a tax provision that ends for a specific corporation, then whatever committee is presiding over that provision in whatever legislation that may be, that committee has a lot of power over that corporation whose tax reductions are going to end at a specific date and time.
What's a sunset provision?
Sunset provision means that something's going to expire at a certain date.
Okay.
But within that, Dustin, like, I lost my train of thought because of Andrew's question. So sunset interplay between specific committees and specific corporations. So what environment does that bring up? Having specific committees being entwined with specific corporations. That is what Mark Blythe talks about when he talks about a kleptocracy. It's a situation in which Congress is incentivized to allow corporations to get to a level where they can provide the greatest amount of funds for elected representatives. And the corporation is incentivized to grow and fund and support these policies that support them. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And who ends up getting fucked in the end? The American people. The Congress isn't working for the people, it's working for the corporations, or it's working for, the people who have the time and money to send hundreds of thousands of dollars to a super PAC or to a specific congressperson in order to get a specific policy passed.
That's why the Congress people talk to their richest donors when they're deciding who to call, right?
Yes. So what's the problem with Congress? There are a multitude of different problems with Congress. Number one is that Congress is beholden to their richest constituents as opposed to all their constituents. Part of that problem is that there's not enough Congress people to represent the people completely. Like, I can't even remember the numbers of Congress people in the first Congress after the Constitution was passed, but I'm relatively certain that there was a greater representation of the people in the House of Representatives than there is today in 2018. Because there's some 700,000 people to 800,000 people being represented by one representative in the state of California, in like Los Angeles. That's asinine. That's not equality of representation.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's
Yeah,
almost as if they should do, like, for every single election, like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem right that there's disequal representation of representatives per representees. Like, there's totally something that has to be done about that for sure.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't like the original founding fathers, and also even going back to the Republic by Plato and Socrates, when they were originally anticipating some of the problems with democracy, they were kind of like designing the systems to be for smaller populations and not anticipating such massively large misrepresentations of the number of people that each congressperson has to cover.
That's not necessarily true, because there are mechanisms set within the Constitution to reapportion the amount of representatives based on a 10-year census. So every 10 years, new districts have to be drawn up. And over the course of the United States history, there have been a reallocation of representatives per state that have increased or decreased reflecting on the population of those states. So I think, I can't remember if it's actually within the language of the Constitution, but it's supposed to be set that the minimum representation is supposed to be equal to the population of the smallest state, which I think is kind of stupid. Like, why are there 600,000 people being represented by one House member in the state of Wyoming when you could have 2 or 3 House members in Wyoming and therefore increase the number of House members in California threefold? You know, there should be 100 representatives for the state of California, really. And there should probably be 50 representatives for the state of New York. That would increase the share of representation by the individual in each of these states. And that's completely separate from, maybe it's not separate from the question of fundraising and lobbying and finance reform. Because if there's a more diffuse amount of representatives, then the share of the pot for these corporations is going to be lower. So it's going to maybe disincentivize corporations from giving money to representatives in the way that they do now.
Yeah, there's also something.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Andrew.
I was just gonna ask, wouldn't it also incentivize them to donate much more to representatives of one state than other states? Like smaller population states, perhaps, or am I forgetting about other factors here?
I don't know exactly what point you're elucidating.
Well, so like if you have more representatives for states with larger populations than the corporations, like how would that work with the corporations choosing who to donate to? Would they try to like figure out which are the best people to donate
Typically,
to
they
in the
bribe people
larger
on-
population states, or would they donate to those smaller population states?
Typically, they target people who have a constituency who works in a certain industry, or they target individuals who are on a certain committee. That's basically how that funding gets distributed. It has less to do with the population, more to do with geography and political capital.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for correcting me on that.
I wanted to, because I was reading. Oh, go ahead, Hunter. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, firstly, guys, I apologize for the T-Mobile. It's very sorry for the damage it's doing to American democracy, but it clearly wanted to, it's clearly working with Debbie Wasserman Schultz to stop Larry Lessig's message from getting out. But yeah, I mean, Andrew, the point is that people are already specifically targeting their funds. Like, I mean, that's the whole point of K Street, which is a street full of lobbyists who, you know, they're getting all this money from corporations, but all they do all day is think about how to make that money go further and have a greater effect on American politics.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the problem is that money has an effect, and it doesn't matter if there's 500 representatives or 500,000 representatives. Money talks within this culture that we live in. So how do we get the money out? That's the question. It's the same reason why you have to put limits on it, in the same way that you had to put limits on presidential elections, or else FDR was president for life. We already had a president for life in the last 100 years, and that was FDR. So it kind of makes you think how to better get these checks and balances working. Because like John McCain's going to be a senator for life. He's been in the Senate for 30 years. Why do we have a 30-year senator when it's supposed to be, when the power is supposed to be beholden to the people alone? Why does John McCain have more power than I do?
Was it FDR or was it Teddy Roosevelt who was the first president to break the like unofficial tradition of stepping down after 2 terms, if I remember correctly? Sorry? FDR? Okay.
Yeah, you're Canadian, so you wouldn't know this shit. It's all right. You should just review the Constitution and then talk.
Well, he did. I think I did suggest him to read Republic Lost. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I didn't even finish it.
I just read that, and I've read I think I've read the Constitution before, or like the one small part of it, or something like that.
Yeah, you know, speaking of the Constitution, I find it quite ironic that people are so up in arms about free speech when they haven't even read the fucking First Amendment to the Constitution. It drives me insane, all this free speech talk with people who don't read the goddamn Constitution that says the right of freedom of speech of the people shall not be infringed, is what the fucking thing says.
So the government sure if I read the whole thing
to abrogate that freedom of speech. Anyway, Hunter.
No, but Isaiah, to build off of that, you know, I mean, that's the thing, is that there's a more fundamental issue than the fact that we have an unrepresentative democracy, which is the misallocation of attention. Like, you know, it's great that we're doing this chat, and it's great that we're going to have however many people who watch this chat, but, you know, how many people are really thinking about electoral reform in this country, and how many people are thinking about Stormy Daniels? So that's, you know, there are these attentional crack merchants, and part of it is the more fundamental issue is redirecting the attention of the American public, or of any public, towards the things that actually matter, because, you know, dictators everywhere have always loved weapons of mass distraction.
Yeah, and that was part of the fall of the Roman Empire, really. Is people were more caught up in the cult of personality of Julius and then Augustus Caesar within the confines of just the Senate. not the greater Roman public writ large, but just the Senate were caught up in the cult of personality of Julius Caesar. So to think that the American public is going to be any better than the Roman senators is asinine. I mean, people are more concerned with keeping up with the Kardashians than universal health care. And that's why we can't get universal health care, because people are more concerned with other things. Is that a function of, you know, the economy? Partially, yes. But also it's a function of somebody else is going to take care of it. It's somebody else's problem. And having it be somebody else's problem is good to an extent, but you have to be engaged enough to where you know what the problems are. And it's not the problem with gun control isn't that 70% of the American population want some form of gun control. It's that nobody can agree on what that gun control is going to look like. And nobody can agree that, you know, we should vote out our representative who is not doing what we want them to do. Like, Congress has 16% approval at its highest over the last year, and yet the turnover rate, like, how many incumbents got voted out last year, or 2 years ago rather? What, like 20, 25? It's insane.
There's a famous quote from William F. Buckley Jr. that's about 40 years old, when he said the turnover in the House of Lords is higher due to superannuation, due to aging, than it is in the U.S. Congress. It's a famous quote of Buckley's from back in the day. The incumbent has such a huge advantage. I think that's the biggest problem. I mean, this early discussion about direct democracy or whatever Daryl was saying, I mean, it's absurd. It's not even worth talking about. The amount of problems it's never going to happen. But the problem of incumbency is a huge problem. The advantage of the incumbent means they're there forever, as long as they want to be.
We have a de facto aristocracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and incumbency is also a problem
it.
with corporate side. So if a company becomes huge, they're going to want to encumber themselves by lobbying to politicians to keep them in power, regardless if their product is not progressing with society or not. So they're going to use political power to keep themselves afloat instead of their own innovation or, free market power, I guess you'd say.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I think that one of the biggest problems in this whole thing by far that a few of you guys have alluded to already is this cultural mindset that, it's too much work to learn about how your own government works, and it's not cool to learn about it, basically.
That's part of the problem, but it's not even the biggest part of the problem, because people are engaged. A lot of people are really engaged with government. Everybody in the US has an opinion about how much the government sucks or what they're doing all right,
But is that opinion often based on actually doing research about it, though?
Oftentimes it's based on real interaction with government agencies. Like, my experience with the VA is that the VA fucking sucks because they can't even update their goddamn software so that I can make a doctor's appointment online. There's shit like that is not being taken care of. And part of the problem with that is that it's an executive, it's under the executive branch. So there's legislation passed by Congress that the executive branch has to fulfill. And because of lobbying and all this, they can't update their software on a regular basis as new software comes out, because they have to have a new law passed in order to do so, right? Because there's government regulations on what specific software the Department of the Veterans Affairs has to use, right? And that's the same thing with all the departments, DOD, DOE, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's laws that are keeping them from updating their technology, right? Why is that? It's because a lot of the technologies that the government uses have to be legacy because there are things that exist within the greater scheme of, the American infrastructure that are 20, 30 years old. So you need to have 20 or 30-year-old technology to deal with those issues. But at the same time, it's because there's these companies who have made this proprietary software that have been used for X amount of time, and everybody's data's on it. And the government's not going to pass a law to hire, 20, 30,000 people to transfer that data over and write new software for it. So there's that problem. Then there's the issue within it. It's like so deep that you could have a lecture series that lasts 40 hours just talking about why it takes so long at the DMV, shit like that, or why speed traps are still illegal in Indiana. Like, you could have long treatises about all these issues, but at the end of the day, the root issue is that the people themselves are not being representative in the halls of government. And why is that? It's because the representatives only care or only have the time themselves to deal with those who give them money. Like, the loudest voices are the ones who throw the most money. And who has the most money? The people who have the most money.
Yeah, and then Lessig in the book, he outlines that officials, senators, representatives spend 30 to 70% of their time strictly on fundraising matters.
So there, and then
They're
go ahead, Hunter.
They're telemarketers. You have the world's most powerful telemarketers are sitting in Congress. And if you know anything about telemarketers, which unfortunately we all do, they will say anything or do anything to get you to commit to what they want.
And they only want money because all they care about is getting elected again.
Yeah,
So
because
should these elections have public funding then, do you think?
That's one solution, and I like that solution. It's a better solution than what we have now.
Or like a voucher system where the government has to match something. Like,
I mean, that's what Lessig talks about all the time.
There was one
Yeah, he talks
controversial
about that.
idea. Yeah, there's a controversial idea that he has, and I don't know what you guys think, but one of them is to increase salaries for representatives in Congress.
Also, that would be good and increase the number of representatives.
Yeah, because he points to Singapore as a model, and I believe Singapore pays their reps like $750,000 a year.
Like,
where would you get the extra money for all that?
From the people who aren't fucking paying taxes, namely corporations and rich people, because they don't pay their fair share of taxes.
That's gonna be hard to do. How would
I don't think so. We're talking about individuals. Like, I remember.
Suggest how to implement that, Dusty? I don't remember.
Well, I'm just gonna harken back to one of the latest episodes of MMA. What Brian said, he pays like almost 50%, and he makes pretty good money, I'm guessing. If he can survive, and we're talking about personal income taxes, like if these super uber rich people aren't paying any taxes at all, they're not paying their fair share, and they're getting so much benefit from their lobbying efforts, and using their profits to push government in their favor, that the net loss is we're on the bottom half for paying much of the taxes.
Yeah,
I wasn't disagreeing with any of that. I'm just curious about how it can be implemented.
So how was the Civil Rights Act of '64 passed? How was the Voting Rights Act of '65 passed? People in the streets, mass protests.
Andrew estimated that for every $1 of lobbying, that corporations get $222 of benefit. So whether that's subsidies or tax breaks or whatever. So if you break that iron triangle and suddenly they're not able to buy all these benefits for themselves, you're going to get a shitload more tax revenue. And let's say that you do pay all your elected representatives $1 million. Well, that's $35 million, which in the federal budget is a drop in the ocean. If you even shaved off some of the waste of the military-industrial complex, you would easily cover that.
Like, and then you have the whole issue of what Big Daddy Callan likes to talk about, the alpaca farmers in New England. Like, why are alpaca pelts? Why is alpaca wool subsidized by the federal government? Because it's in the law. So how do we get rid of all these old laws? You have to vote out Congress and vote in new people.
Well, the problem is it's going to be very hard to get people to pinpoint that specific law, because if you're having these subsidies for alpaca farmers, where are you going to get the populace to vote against that? And you're already going to have a populace for that, which is the alpaca farmers. So it's really hard to educate people about all the amounts of subsidies that we give out with no return or any helpful impact on our economy or with jobs or anything of that nature.
Well, and it goes even deeper than that, because like the corn subsidies in the United States are ridiculous alone, because they're set at um they're set at depression levels, right? So because of the sorry, Hunter, your microphone was echoing, so I muted you for a second. Anyway, so because of the necessities of having great state control during the Great Depression, you know, to try and feed people, there are all these government regulations and all these government, you know, subsidies that are being distributed to corporate farms around the country that don't necessarily benefit the average everyday American. But at the time, most farms were smaller than they are now. And because of consolidation, most are corporate farms where there's just, you know, 6 people running 6,000 acres or some shit like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but that's irrelevant. The point is that it's not the same landscape that it was in 1933 as it is today. So why do we still have the same laws governing the agricultural system or governing whatever system we have that were instituted in 1933?
Well, and this gets to a great point that Lessig made as well, which is, you know, if you were a foreigner and looking at America, you would say, you know, Silicon Valley, holy shit, that's amazing. They're innovating all the time. Hollywood, oh my God, so creative, so much coming out of there. Admittedly, a lot of what comes out of Hollywood is dog shit, but, you know, at least we're trying. And then you would look at Washington, you'd be like, what a fucking cesspool. Is it in the same country? And since we're, you know, at least nominally, most of us are committed to the ideas of mixed martial arts, and that, you know, we should constantly learn, unlearn, relearn. We should constantly be rewriting the legal code based on how things are changing. So it should be this constant process of combing through the legal code and being like, oh, corn subsidies don't make sense anymore. Oh, alpaca farming, nope, that's not a big priority right now. Oh, we need to have all these new rules because of big data. And, you know, that just should be the standard operating procedure. Like, we need to constantly be innovating and finding better ways to do government. And, you know, using new software to make the VA experience better for veterans, you know, on and on and on and on. What's our transport policy now? How does all of this change based on new technology?
Were you thinking of any particular changes in mind in terms of big data?
Well, I mean, you know, the thing that I mean, I'm not the only person who's made these parallels, but listen, we're living in a second Gilded Age, and you have these massive concentrations of not just wealth, but power. And, you know, it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, we've had, you know, Dagger Keltner on multiple times, and we know what and how power corrupts people, which is that it makes them more impulsive and less empathetic. And so the reality is that it's totally reasonable in a democracy to want to figure out checks and balances on the power of the big five.
And what are the big five, real quick?
Facebook, Google, Amazon, BrianCallen.com, and no, I don't remember what the big five are, but it's like, it is Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, yeah.
Facebook.com/mixedmentalarts.
Yeah, mixedmentalarts.online.
Yeah. Dusty, what were you going to say?
I was going to say is, do you think the forefathers didn't see at the point that they created the Constitution that there was going to need to be a balance of power amongst corporate institutions?
Corporations as they exist today didn't exist in 1782.
Yeah, so it looks like nothing really significant as far as, you know, I know there were these laws about monopolization, but it doesn't really see like these things are being instituted much these days.
Well, you had the Sherman Antitrust Act that was passed in 1912, which was against Standard Oil, which was to dismantle the monopoly that Standard Oil had on the oil market in the United States, because they had something ridiculous like 80% of the oil market.
It's like and
Standard Oil was broken up. Standard Oil was broken up into different companies, two of which are Exxon and Mobil. And now what do you have? Exxon, Mobil, one company. It's insane. It's insane.
Like, well, there's other oil companies now, though, aren't there?
No, it's still mostly the same ones. It's still mostly what was broken off of Standard Oil plus ConocoPhillips. Like American Oil, part of the problem is that something like oil should probably have been a state-owned operation since 1890, but it's not. Whereas, why?
It has national security implications.
Yeah, so basically ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips and all these other fucking places, one, so much of what they do is on federal land and not not land owned by those corporations. Two is because what's under the land is a fuzzy legal territory of ownership. Number three is the environmental implications of oil extraction affects not just their own property but other people. So it's an interstate, completely like national issue. Like if somebody's extracting oil from Central California, it's going to affect the air in Arizona. So that's something that the federal government has to deal with. It's not simply that Standard Oil of California has to cut a deal with both the Arizona and California government, because they're not going to see eye to eye, as it were. Third, like why is Standard Oil able to pull that oil from the ground and sell it at the rate that they do? Because basically they have the full backing of the United States government to secure their oil wells and secure their secure the market and to back the market with dollars in order to have them function. So why should this one entity reap all the benefits of a natural resource that is held by the U.S. government and therefore the U.S. people, the people of the United States, to themselves writ large? I think it's much more equitable, given what is put into the government, for something like oil or coal or railroads, things of that nature, or like federal highway systems, to be state owned, but at the federal level.
Why is it better for the government to control those and reap those benefits than it is for the corporations?
What is the government? What is the government? The government in the United States is supposed to be beholden to the people alone. So the government is
not,
me.
though.
The government is me. Oh, it is if I show up at my congressman's office and berate him for 3 hours. That's how government starts changing at this level, at the individual level.
So more people should be like you then, Isaiah.
Well, more people have that. Everybody in the United States can call their congressman today and say, hey, this, that, and the other. Take care of this, that, and the other. So the problem therein is that I'm not necessarily going to be able to get on the phone with my congressperson because they're on the phone with somebody from Standard Oil, because Standard Oil is giving them money. So that corruption there, by saying that money is free speech, dilutes my political power, and it makes it so the government isn't beholden to the people alone.
That's why I'm not so sure it's better for the government to control the oil
So
reserves than it is for the corporations.
Standard Oil of California is giving money to a California center to ensure that they're protected by federal law. And Standard Oil of California no longer exists,
Yep.
and it's a state-owned organization. There's no longer that stream of money.
Yeah, but Isaiah, can we talk about what the outcomes are of countries where things like oil and natural gas are nationalized? Because there are huge problems with that as well, because that's the whole point. You have to deal with any concentration of power. And if too much power ends up concentrated in the hands of the government, well, it doesn't really make a difference, because you could just as easily end up having the government co-opted by a small number of cronies.
Are you talking about the Brazilian Netflix
like
show?
when Stalin nationalized the farms during World War II.
Say again?
Yeah.
Say again, Andrew?
It's like it just kind of reminds me, and I'm not saying there are necessarily a lot of similarities at all, but it reminds me of like Stalin nationalizing the farms during World War II.
Well, the U.S. government nationalized all heavy industry during World War II as well, and nationalized food production as well, and put rations on the people. So
I'm not saying it's always bad to nationalize things. Like FDR doing that during World War II is an example of how it can be good, for sure.
Exactly, that's my point. Is to answer Hunter, you can have a Venezuela, you can have a Saudi Arabia, you could have a UAE, and you can have a Norway. All 4 or 5 of those examples all have national oil companies that dwarf ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Royal Dutch Shell. All the state-owned oil monopolies dwarf any privately owned oil company. And because of that, they're able to control the market a little bit better. So that's the reason why OPEC has so much power, is because it's a confluence of state-owned oil producers, right? So because they're a cartel and they have that much market power, they're able to control the price of oil. Now, let's say all the oil production in the United States was owned by the United States government, and all the profits of the oil industry went to a sovereign wealth fund, like they do in Norway, or like they do in Sweden, or like they do in Finland, or like they do in Alaska.
Brian Callen would be calling you a socialist right now.
Well, I like Alaskan socialism.
But also, by the way, also the same thing. I mean, Brazil, Petrobras is owned by the government, and there's massive corruption there. Russia, right? I mean, it's not a nationalized oil fund, but they're all in cahoots with the Kremlin. The Saudis, so I mean, the issue is corruption. And corruption, it doesn't matter who, nationalizing doesn't solve the problem, can make the problem worse. And either way, you have to deal with transparency and accountability, and really making sure that you are actually practicing the letter of the law, and that people aren't back channeling and siphoning off money. I mean, if you want to see a dysfunctional nationalized oil system, I'm glad that Dusty brought it up, because it actually wasn't what I had in mind. There's a great show on Netflix called O Mecanismo, The Mechanism, which is all about that corruption.
About Petrobras, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but you have Petrobras, and then you have Norway and Denmark, and like the whole.
I think there's one thing that's really important.
Has nationalized oil as well, by the way.
Like, one of the most important considerations that we have to just think about is we do not want to transfer our current form of corruption over to this proposed nationalized oil. So my problem would be if this were to happen, how would we stop our current form of corruption just transferring over to this new form, where it can be corrupted, as in some countries have been?
There's
So I
always
think-
a risk. There's always a risk no matter what you do. You just have to like find the best solutions for each different set of circumstances, I think.
So I'm gonna push Francis Fukuyama. Oh fuck, political order and decay. I think it's the specific book that I'm thinking of, in which he talks about what makes a modern state effective, right? So everything in that book is set up under the thesis of how do you get from an utterly corrupt state such as Brazil to a state like Denmark or a state like Germany, even, because Germany has a lower degree of corruption than we do in the United States. And the question is, how do you get from here to there? One is high trust in the institutions that exist, right? Including the media, including the DMV, including the police. So many people around the country don't trust these institutions, so they think they're constantly being lied to or being targeted. So when I drive down the street, or drive down the interstate in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, Iowa, I'm constantly in fear of being pulled over by a state trooper who is trying to extract some fucking cash from me for the municipality. Doesn't matter if it's for the municipality or for his own pocket. It's still money from me going to somebody who has no relation to me other than the fact that we're in the same country. There's stuff like that. And there's a propensity for corruption due to distrust in these institutions, and that's how you get situations in places like Mexico or Central America or Central Asia, in which in order to conduct any business, you have to bribe officials because the officials have their own, there's an economy of bribery there. That doesn't really exist in the United States. So the extent to which, bribes would deal with a state-owned organization, I don't think would be as prevalent, because you have other state-owned enterprises that don't have that same kind of aspect going on. Like all nuclear energy in the United States is owned by the federal government. Is there corruption in nuclear energy? I would say no, because if there was, a Mr. Burns paying for more nuclear energy plants, there would probably be more nuclear energy plants around the country.
Isaiah,
Yes.
the military is also owned by the government. Is there corruption in the military-industrial complex in the United States?
I would say within the Department of Defense, at certain levels, there is, but the greatest corruption in the military-industrial complex isn't within the Department of Defense itself, but is more due to laws passed by Congress that take material production and actual administration away from the military itself and puts it in the hands of defense contractors. So
that's called rent-seeking behavior. And if the oil was nationalized, you would just get rent-seeking behavior, which is exactly what happens with Petrobras, where they have all sorts of contractors who just bid up their contracts, do things late, do everything they can to extract money from the state-owned oil monopoly. So I guarantee you that the same, the form of corruption would change, but you would still have corruption that you can see happening in the United States.
Well, but what am I saying with the defense industry? I'm not saying it's such a weird situation that we're in 2018, because there are actually, it's very complicated with who is doing what within the military industrial complex. Part of it is definitely the fact that there's so many defense contractors being paid by the Defense Department to man these specific positions. But is it a question of the goals of of the organization or the ownership of the organization. Like, would the goals of the ownership or of the organization be different if, you know, instead of having planes flying, you know, pork and beans to and from Bagram Air Base, if they were manned by, you know, USGIs as opposed to defense contractors? What the prices would change, you know, the necessities of having that job be done would change. You know, sometimes I wonder if there are these bases that exist because there is a shipping company that has people employed that needs to ship, you know, food to and from this base. You know, if that company didn't exist, it would be up to the needs of the Air Force, to the needs of the Army, to determine where these resources need to be allocated. So,
well, do you think the contractors that are working as security forces, whatnot, are rent seeking?
I don't think they're rent seeking. I think that they're an imperfect solution to a problem that is bigger than just defense contractors.
They're rent seeking, Dustin, in my opinion. I mean, you know, there's all sorts of crazy behavior that goes on where, you know, I mean, there's rent seeking behavior where people create an unnecessary market and then fulfill that unnecessary market as a way to extract money. And then there's just the insanity. I mean, often what ends up happening is because you have such a low trust system, there are all sorts of mechanisms that are then designed into the government to prevent corruption that just end up, you know, with people don't get to keep their budgets if they have any money left in the kitty at the end of the year. So at the end of the year, they buy a bunch of shit they don't need. And then as soon as the calendar year rolls over, they return it.
Yeah, and I just want to say too that you guys all probably know a lot more about this than me, but if when we're making predictions about outcomes, no one actually knows what's going to happen, but like you guys are probably making a lot of really good guesses.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that something is going to be better than what we have now, and I don't think, like, even if the state of California statified, not nationalized, but statified, you know, the oil production in the state of California, that would be preferable to Standard Oil of California taking all the profits, in my opinion. But, you know, Hunter, what it sounds like you're saying is that there's going to be corruption regardless of what system you have.
I think there is.
Yeah, of course there's going to be corruption, and that's the whole point. Is it doesn't matter how you design the system, people are going to try and game it, which is why you have to. I mean, that's why the founding fathers studied every available system on historical record to design a system that would attempt to minimize the level of corruption that exists. And I think that's the whole point. Is that's what the American people or any people should be doing full time, is constantly trying to study other systems to design systems of government that create better checks and balances. And I think that's, you know, to your point, Isaiah, like if you nationalize the oil system, I think, you know, you could end up like Brazil, where all that loose cash floating around in the government hands may make the system more corrupt, right? You know, if you essentially give the government a winning lottery ticket, well, then now everybody's going to be jockeying for the influence of the government. Or you could end up with a situation like Norway where it works well and you end up with a great sovereign wealth fund that can pay for all sorts of things. The thing that I would say is that, you know, what you have there are two very different cultures. And, you know, the Norwegians have much more of a community ethic, and they pay much more, you know, they pay much more attention. There's much more of a sense of responsibility. There's a sense of not having too much or not standing out too much. So, you know, I mean, a large part of this is also culture. And in the United States, the big problem is that there's this very individualistic culture, and everybody wants to focus on their and theirs, and they don't want to be bothered with government. And the ancient Greek word idiot actually comes from somebody who was so self-centered and so focused on their little life that they paid no attention to what was going on in the system as a whole. And that's the problem, is we have a bunch of, to reference Green Day, American idiots. Because
you know, I take well what you're saying. I think it's too reductionist, honestly, because America is more than just the individualistic nature of America. What is in Peoria isn't the same as what's in New York. It's a melting pot. It's like a fucking mortadella of a culture, right? There's all these enclaves of different cultural aspects that are stuck in this slurry of fat and meat that makes up America, and it's all congealed together. So that's the whole point of why the founding fathers set it up to have, centralized command and localized control.
It's a generalization, Isaiah, but generalizations are general. Like, do you think that in general Americans are more individualistic than Norwegians?
That's not what I said. I said that it was too reductionist. I didn't say that it was too general. Yeah, it's a generalization that works. I agree with that. Americans are more individualistic than Scandinavians, and are more individualistic than Chinese people. Part of that is the landscape in which we live. But at the same time, the concerns of New York are not the concerns of Baton Rouge, So there is good reason why all these concerns are separated in the way that they are.
Hunter, what you said about like finding a new system and combining different tactics remind me of something I think I heard Dan Carlin and at least a few other people say a bunch of times, which is that, we assume that we only have to choose from the types of government systems that we already have, and we can't like create new ones. And we assume that like a lot of Americans in particular assume that democracy is the best form of government, and therefore we should spread democracy everywhere. But that's like ignorant about all of the different types of governments that are available and the different types that could be available that haven't been invented yet.
And also it's ignorant of what the underlying cultural realities are. A lot of the harm that has been done with
I think going off of Andrew's point, that it seems that the level of corruption is outpacing our ability to handle it, or at least put a spotlight on it, at least. And the incumbents in power do not like looking at other systems that are working and wanting to implement them at the expense of their fundraisers. So it's a very difficult system to break.
Hey guys. Hello?
And then somebody in the chat room says you should read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Hey guys.
We also have another comment by Kyle. Americans seem more me first than other countries. Breeds a lot of success until you have to work together for something.
Yep.
That I agree with. Well, someone says,
guys.
What would Mark Blythe say about it? Says he'd probably say, it's all fucked. Have a drink, mate. It'll all work out. All right, I see a lot of people smiling in pictures, but no response from you guys, leaving me hanging.
Can you guys hear me?
That would be an awesome response.
Okay, Learned Hand was responding to Kyle 4. So Kyle, you're going to have to rebut that statement. All right, so yeah.
Hello?
considering there's just so many different aspects that have to be attacked simultaneously to get this fundamental systematic change that we need. Like, I know that the economy of influence is something that's very wide reaching and nebulous, but there are resources out there that can get us to understand the economy of influence.
Yes.
Like
And-
Republic Lost.
Oh yeah, the Republic Lost is a good resource, and people need to read the fucking Constitution. If you're an American, you should read the Constitution. Period.
I'd also say Fukuyama,
Always.
which Isaiah brought
And
up.
then one thing that I think is important as well, and this is something that Lessig highlights in this book, he never attacks. He firmly states that he is a Republican. I'm sorry, a Democrat. He firmly states that he's a lefty, he's a liberal, but nowhere in the book does he specifically attack or go after Republicans. He wants to explicitly frame this issue as a bipartisan issue that all sides of the party need to take, an interest in. And he's even, tried to hold conferences with the Tea Party about very specific issues as opposed to, playing partisan politics. We know at this point it's
Talk to people at the
unhelpful.
Cato Institute about it.
Yeah, and I think on both sides of the coin, everyone can agree simply just by polls referencing, how much trust people have in Congress. And I think Hunter's point of getting that trust up is probably important as well.
Yeah.
McEldoon says someone is stealing Hunter's car.
Hunter's car got stolen. That's why Hunter disappeared.
Well, Hunter's cars are always getting broken into and stolen. What's going on?
It's because he lives in LA. There's always a Mexican.
Sounds like he needs a better alarm system.
Yeah, or another Mexican to guard his car. Is that racist to talk about Mexicans like that?
Someone says, can you hear the guy on your podcast saying, can you hear me? Is there someone saying, can you hear me? I don't hear anybody.
I think he's having a small stroke.
I think some people on our chat are hearing people that we're not hearing.
Perhaps they're being talked to by the military-industrial complex.
Oh, they're saying that Hunter is saying, can you hear me? That's weird that the people in the chat room can hear him, but we can't. I'm not sure why that is. Let me try here. Hunter, can you say something?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I could definitely hear you.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was weird. I was the ghost in the machine for a little while, and apparently people in the chat could hear me, but you guys couldn't. Anyway, yeah, I would just say, as well as Republic Lost, like, obviously we love Lessig, but there are other great resources too, like Fukuyama, which Isaiah brought up, Luigi Zingalis's Capitalism for the People, and then Ganesh Siddharaman's The Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution. All really good reads all around this issue. And I think the other thing that I would also really offer is that people already understand the issue of governance in terms of sports and video games. Like, you need good rule systems in order to ensure good, healthy competition. And I think that's one way to help get people to start thinking about the issue in terms of politics, because politics makes people bored. But when we start talking about game design and how the game of politics is designed, I think we have the potential to get people much, much more engaged.
Well, right now, politics are designed so that you can get an unfair advantage by making microtransactions. That would be like the gaming terms of what Congress is.
I think there is a tiny bit of hope within the context of what's going on now with Bernie Sanders and his crowd-funded campaign, essentially. average of $27 per donation in 2016. But there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more individual involvement in government and less third party involvement. I should be able to have my congressman should be directly responsible to me, and not I shouldn't have to contact a third party to contact my congressman. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes a lot of sense. But we also got to think too. I know it's such a strange way the American system is because we have the states and the federal government, but there's also the argument that the federal government should be shrinking as well. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not.
I don't know. I don't know, honestly, because there are some aspects of the federal government that need to expand, like healthcare for both Medicaid, VA, and there should be nationalized healthcare. But at the same time, the military's too big, and I've yet to meet anybody who's in the military who doesn't think that the military is too big, because when I was stationed in Hawaii, it's a convoluted fucking game of telephone to try and get, the right pair of pants for deployment oftentimes. So is that the most agile way that a government can be structured? I don't think so. And the same thing goes with the federal highway system and the federal railroad system and, air traffic control. There are better ways to do it. Have we done it better in the past? Yes. Can we do it better in the future? Yeah. But what's happening now is not working.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And there's certainly just talking about single payer, there's some problems that, of course, we're going to have to, as a country, address before we even transfer over to some type of system that is single payer. Because if going by the drug prices and everything else that we're dealing with here in the U.S., if we were just to make everything single payer without addressing that, we basically would be bankrupting the country.
Well, I think it's a little bit more complex than that, because look at what Nixon did in 1972 when he took away the gold standard. That shit was overnight, and all of a sudden there was no gold-backed currency in the world anymore. Everything was backed by dollars. So things that have huge shocks can be good and they can be bad. It's a matter of how they're executed.
Yeah, but how would the government pay for the services? That's not my only problem. Because if we're going by present day drug pricing and service pricing, where nothing is transparent, then me having to go to an emergency room to get my blood wiped off of my forehead cost me $1,200 on the bill. That's not something that's sustainable.
Yeah, but that's why you have to get money out of politics. Yeah.
Yeah, $1,200. I got in a fight. I had a gash on my head that was pouring blood all over my face. It wasn't a huge cut that required stitches. It just looked really, really bad. So I went to the emergency room, sat down for 10 minutes. They wiped the blood off of my forehead. They didn't give me a Band-Aid. They didn't give me stitches. They said, "Okay, you're fine." And I walked out of there with a $1,200 bill.
Yeah,
that would be free here.
Yeah, and Dusty, that's also why you need campaign finance reform, because the whole point is that the drug companies and the insurance companies have designed the system to make it possible for them to engage in that sort of thing. If you had a single-payer government system, then you would have real negotiating power and they would be able to negotiate it down. Bush, with his prescription drug bill, basically made it so that Medicare and Medicaid couldn't negotiate special bulk discounting prices, which tacked another $1 trillion onto the bill. So we certainly can't afford a nationalized healthcare system as long as drug companies are able to write the laws and insurance companies are able to write the laws. But if you fix those problems of corruption, it actually becomes much cheaper. We spend more on healthcare. That was Mark Bly's point in this country, and get worse care.
Yeah, and Dan Carlin made that point as well in an episode of Common Sense a while back. I think episode 314. I can't remember the name of it, but he made the point that we spend way more, like almost double than Japan, and Japan has the longest life expectancy of any country in the world.
And what's crazy too is Japan, they have twice as many doctor's visits.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're paying less. So your $600 or your $1,200 bill would be free to you and probably cost the hospital $12 to wipe blood off your head. So it's not a matter of finding $1,200 to pay for the service. It's a matter of that service no longer costs as much as it did before.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell the insurance companies do to make something as simple as wiping blood off my forehead a $1,200 bill.
Well,
I don't even know if it has to do with the hospital, or do you think it's with the insurance company?
Think about how many levels of bureaucracy are there between the nurse who wiped your head to the people who are paying, to your monthly premium, right? So you have to pay the insurance company who has to pay.
I was uninsured. This was a bill that was.
Let's just say, for sake of argument, that you are insured, right? Let's say you're insured. You have to pay your monthly premium, right? And it's a $1,200 service that they're charging. Why is it $1,200? Because the insurance company has to pay somebody to take in your payment, and then the insurance company has to pay a liaison between the greater hospital network and themselves. And then that hospital network has to pay liaisons between the network and the individual hospital. And the individual hospital has to pay, different clerks to deal with all the paperwork that go with filing for the billing for the service that you got. And then they have to pay the nurse who triaged you, and they have to pay, the company who supplies the gauze to wipe off your head. So it's a upstream downstream effect of there's so many links in the chain, so many middlemen, that the price goes up astronomically because every aspect of it has to get their cut.
Yeah, and at the highest level, if it's a public insurance company, the shareholders have to get their monetary value.
Well, and if it was owned by the federal government, it would be the taxpayer pays a yearly fee in the tax bill for the federal health system, and it gets allocated the same way that it does in the military, which to Hunter's point, like, the military industrial complex is a big fucking problem. But why is it a big problem? It's because of the corporatization of like Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, who have all these different factories providing materiel to the military, and the military isn't building the weapons themselves, and they're not employing soldiers in supply, and they're not employing soldiers to do this, that, or the other, which is good and bad because it allows soldiers to be more professionalized, but it's also bad because it increases the cost of the military, and it's artificially large as it is. So
here's one big problem.
It's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
Yeah, because I know from what I've read, the medical industry is 1/6 of our economy or something like that. So imagine if you just remove that. Like, it's almost as if it's artificial like there's a bunch of artificial jobs that have been created because of it. But what would the impact of removing these artificial positions in favor of like a single player system? Like, do you think that might have a large impact on just like regular Americans, like this loss of these bureaucratic and artificial positions, these middleman positions?
Yes, it would have a huge effect.
A medical jobocalypse.
Yeah, for like removing a ton of clerks from a ton of positions. Yeah, it would have a huge effect.
Yeah, because that's something to be a little bit fearful, and we would have to plan for something like that. Like, if it's 1/6 of our economy, then removing that giant, unwieldy, and bureaucratic apparatus, even though it's kind of like a fake economy, like quote unquote, um, I'm just wondering what would happen if. I know this wouldn't be an overnight thing, and it couldn't because it'd probably just destroy our country overnight. But it's definitely something that's incrementally going to have to be dealt with.
Well, I think that eventually what's going to need to happen is a national health care system by hook or by crook. And because of that, it's going to put us in a situation where we're going to have to face that cliff of the dissolution of so many jobs. You know, if it's by if it's by a ton of people dying or going bankrupt, or if it's by nationalizing the healthcare system, it's going to happen one way or another. It's just a matter of choosing the least worst option.
I think that was the same argument too with the bank bailout as well. You know, it's what option do you think we chose was the best option? You know, just continue with the same system or waiting for another giant collapse to happen in the future.
Yeah. We're fucked. Just drink.
All right. Someone in the chat room has some statistic here. He says healthcare spending in the U.S. This is from Learned Hand. Healthcare spending in the U.S. is at least 20%, 1/5, and in the U.K. it's only 10%.
Yeah, and that's a severe problem. Like, it's like, what are we putting our money on? We put so much money into the defense industry, and we put so much money into the healthcare industry, whether it's through the government or if it's through, you know, private transactions. It's still more money than they're worth in the end. Like, in my opinion, at least.
Well, it's almost like a giant Ponzi scheme that's waiting to topple.
Yeah, it's a bubble. It's a bubble. Like, healthcare is a bubble.
Yeah, it's probably gonna just like with all the corporatism, you know, that we see around us. It makes me feel like you know, cyberpunk is coming.
What, Hunter? What is your cyberpunk outfit gonna look like? That's the real question. Are you gonna have spiky shoulders? Hunter, are you there?
I think maybe he's having that problem again.
I think he might be driving. Anyway, but I think to put it in real terms of what the individual American can do for the system, you know, it's the same thing as always. It's, you got to talk to your congressperson. If you don't talk to your congressperson, you're not going to be heard. And I don't know, man, because to get back to Daryl's point about direct democracy before, like, Dusty, you lived in California for, you know, most of your life, and there's the proposition system in California, which is direct democracy.
Yes, and well, Prop 8.
Yeah, Prop 8, you know, stopped stop the court decision or reverse the court decision that said, gay marriage was legal in California. So it's tyranny of the majority sometimes doesn't work in your favor.
Yeah, especially with Prop 8.
Yeah. And like, oh, there's
And I was there for Prop 8, and I was like, Jesus.
I was there too.
What the hell is going on here?
I was there too. And I had been convinced that, being pro Prop 8 was a good idea, and I was wrong. And me being wrong probably costs a lot of people a lot of grief, and probably it's a horrible thing that, with great power comes great responsibility, and you can't ignore that aspect of governance, and I don't have enough time in my life to know every aspect of what laws should be passed for, this, that, or the other, like healthcare. Like, I don't know the right solution for that, and I don't have enough time to write X amount of studies about why healthcare should be nationalized. I know that looking at the bare bones data that I have seen, that nationalized healthcare would be a better idea than what we have now. But at the end of the day, I don't know exactly what the American future for healthcare is going to look like. And that's something that should be debated and discussed in the halls of Congress, but is not going to be, because Pfizer pays the senators who make the decisions.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard, man. It is difficult. And let's see, someone from the chat is asking what's Prop 8. Yeah, Isaiah's addressing that. Yeah, and Prop 8 was, what was it, a constitutional amendment that was proposed?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but it was specifically to say that marriage was between one man and one woman in the state of California.
Yeah, it was for same-sex marriage. And mostly people were for it.
Yeah, it passed.
It was a very slim majority.
No, yeah, it was a big majority. 60% I think it passed with 60% of the vote in California to outlaw gay marriage.
All right, so I brought it up. It was pretty slim. It says 52-47.
Oh,
but
fair enough.
Yeah, it was all the densely populated areas, of course, didn't want to ban gay marriage, but California is a very big state.
I was thinking of Prop 22 in the year 2000.
Oh yeah, Prop 22. Well, Prop 8 was Prop 22 was to prevent same-sex marriages. And that one was overwhelming. Yeah, that was an overwhelming yes ban, and that was 60-40.
Yeah.
But it's just too, if you just look at Prop 8, that barely passed. It was a very slim majority in which it passed. So, like saying just California, you need a very slim majority. It doesn't have to be overwhelming.
How slim was that?
So 52-47 for Prop 8, which it was the California Marriage Protection Act, which made the man-woman marriage enshrined in the Constitution of the state of California. And Prop 22 was essentially the same. Prop 22 was passed with 61% of the vote, saying that marriage is between one man and one woman in the state of California. And Prop 8 passed with 52.24% of the vote. And turnout for Prop 8 was almost 80% of the registered voter population.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's you know 30% of the population turned out to vote for it. No, 80% turned out. 52% voted that marriage is between one man and one woman in the state of California.
Yeah, and then I think Prop 22 had less of a turnout.
Probably, who knows? But
I
the
think
point is that you're going to fuck over a lot of people in a direct democracy system sometimes, and it's not always going to be pretty. That's why you have all these different sets of government to basically perform checks and balances on them. Like, because Prop 8 was deemed unconstitutional by the federal Supreme Court, by the Supreme Court of the United States, it no longer mattered that 52% of the people said marriage is between one man and one woman. That violates the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of equal protection. So it doesn't matter what the majority says. And that's why the Constitution is important, because you can't have situations like you could have the entire state of Alabama saying, this is a Christian state, but that would violate the First Amendment. That's why that's there.
Yeah, and then I don't know. It's the funny thing is it's not just Congress. All levels of government have are within an economy of influence. Like even like judges, like we have conservative and liberal judges. That's something that really shouldn't happen at all. They're there to interpret the law.
Well, there's no such thing as true objectivity. And
I know that, but people try to get judges like appointed or even those that are elected based off of political reasons.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks. It sucks that people can't look at the Constitution and come to the same conclusion. But I mean, I would take that over having a monarch, and I would take that over having an aristocracy.
Certainly, but sometimes it just feels like, especially nowadays, that we're in an oligarchy.
Yeah, that is true. And the question is, how do we fix that? I think public funding of congressional elections would be step one.
Well,
about
yeah, for sure. Like, certainly we do have to solve the problem of a congressman having to spend 30% of their time fundraising. They should be solely, their whole job should be answering to their constituents, not trying to fundraise for their next election or for their party.
I think if Congress people spent 6 months out of the year in their district, dealing with their constituents directly, that would do a lot to ameliorate the corruption that is endemic in Washington.
Like, just imagine a simple thing such as remoting in the Congress. You don't have a K Street right outside the Capitol. Like, imagine the scrambling that would be needed to deal with a Congress that got to remain in with their constituents.
Yeah, that would be fucking great. That would be fucking, like, we have goddamn airplanes. Why is Congress in session for most of the year? That's another issue. Like,
like we have the technology so that they don't have to spend so much time in Washington, D.C. Like, the only reason they're spending so much time is because they're talking with lobbyists. It's not spending a bunch of time looking over bills.
Like, if they had one session a month, even, it should be like the U.S. Army Reserves, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year for Congress.
Yeah, there's a reason why the suburbs surrounding DC, like the houses are ridiculously huge.
Uh-huh.
Like
It's
just driving to work here, it's like Jesus Christ.
oh
It's
yeah.
just like 10 miles of gigantic houses.
Yeah, go anywhere near American University or in Georgetown. Good luck
Or
finding
Langley, man, just all the houses
Langley,
near CIA
Sterling.
headquarters is ridiculous. Like the sizes of those houses in that area.
Yeah. And that's because of lobbying, and that's because of defense contractors, and that's because of energy contractors, and that's because of, you know, all these lobbying firms that employ people at, you know, $500,000 to go and talk to Congress people and get them to write in new legislation to protect that industry. And it there are arguments in favor of that, but there's also, you know, the dissolution of what democracy is supposed to be in the main. When
Yeah,
you
I
have
just think the
that kind of
surrounding neighborhoods of DC, if everybody saw what it looked like, they would be pissed off.
oh yeah, they'd be with pitchforks and torches.
Yeah, nobody really knows what these areas look like unless they live in them. Like I'm not saying I'm rich because there are apartment buildings still. There's not like starter homes. There's none of that. There's like you either live in an apartment building or you live in a gigantic ass house.
A mansion.
Yeah, basically. Because like I live in apartments and like down the street, just like a couple blocks, it's just like mansions for 10 miles.
Well, and that's why I hate the state of Virginia, because Alexandria and all these other places around the Beltway kind of give it a bad name because it's oligarchy town. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's for sure. But
I mean,
you
Prince
don't know
George's
property
County
here.
PG County isn't any better.
Well, PG is not really. It's not the same as Northern Virginia.
Yeah, Northern Virginia is worse.
Like Northern Virginia is ridiculous. It's just gigantic houses and apartment buildings. Like
Yeah,
there's no in between.
slums and mansions.
Well, in Northern VA, there's not really like slummy slums like there are in Maryland, but like the apartment building I live is basically like a gated community. It's not a slummy. Like the prices are way too high, that's for sure. Like
Yeah.
for an apartment, like what you can get for like you can rent a like 4-bedroom house in Austin for far cheaper than what you can get for like a 2-bedroom apartment. Like it's ridiculous.
It's fucked. It's fucked.
Yeah.
So what have we learned today, Dustin?
We have learned that we're fucked. I know Ed hasn't chimed in too much. Did you want to say something about what we talked about?
Me?
Yeah, because you've been silent. You usually have you usually have some contention that we can argue over, but you haven't said anything.
I mean, no, I'm good. I have my views, and I don't and I don't have a lot of answers how to clean up the swamp. Frankly, I think public funding it might be a good idea, although that could lead to more graft on the sly, and it wouldn't have addressed the Trump problem. Trump spent no money and got elected, and he was a billionaire anyway. So, you know, there's no easy answers. I mean, this mob rule idea is direct democracy, I guess you guys called it, I think is an absurdity.
Oh, that wasn't me. That was
oh no, I know,
Radical.
I know. And I'm criticizing the idea, not the person who brought up the idea. So, but I don't have any answers. The idea that it's mandated in the U.S. Constitution that there's 435 members of the House, and that hasn't changed. Perhaps a larger House, more representation could be helpful. It could lead to more problems. So, I mean, the one thing that concerns me is the incredible advantage the incumbent has once they're there. So things like term limits, which conservatives were very much for when it first came up, I guess it was in the early 90s, which kind of surprised me that conservatives were for it. The National Review magazine was for it. That could be a good idea. There are no term limits now, unless I'm mistaken. I mean, my name is Edward M. Kennedy, and Senator Edward Kennedy was a senator longer than I was alive. Longer than, right. Yeah, he was a senator before I was born, and he died, 10 years ago? I mean, there's something wrong with all of that. So, but as far as solutions go, I don't know. Getting the money out of it obviously is huge, but in a market-based economy with a democracy, I don't see how that's possible. The Supreme Court's ruling that corporations are people and that they can donate to political campaigns, not particular humans, but actual corporations, I think that's hugely problematic and a disgrace. I'm willing to listen, but to the opposing view, but I thought that was a huge mistake. I honestly don't know. I think that a lot of these problems have been around since our founding, and if not for 1,000 years. And I think that our ability to get this information so quickly has heightened everybody's awareness. And I'm at a loss. I really am.
I think one thing, well, if we're talking about Citizens United, one thing they didn't argue about was about undue influence. Yes, a lot of people like to think that the First Amendment is supposed to be absolute in all things, but you can't bribe somebody. That's obviously illegal. They did not argue over whether corporations being able to do so with campaigns was undue influence. They did not even argue that. They just argued it over, is it a freedom of speech issue? And they kind of threw the undue influence aspect out the window. So something has to be done as regards to just reevaluating, what is undue influence. It's like, I don't believe that they handled that case particularly well. But we'll have to see. But the thing I really want to hammer into people's psyches is that there are some very important things that we have to pay attention to, and Stormy Daniels is not one of them.
Well, yeah, you've said that. I mean, when you say, generally that's true, of course. I mean, there's a number of reasons why everybody's familiar with that story, and the most obvious one is it's about sex, which everybody understands, right? It's not complicated. We all know that we're all familiar with those instincts, sexual lust and so on. So it's something that everybody's going to gravitate towards, but it's still an important story because of what may or may not come out of that story, right?
Is it important in the same way that that
That veterans health care is? No, it isn't.
Well, and that's the exact point. Like, people have a limited bandwidth to put on governmental issues, and using Stormy Daniels or using, Russian hookers peeing on Trump is a distraction from the greater issues that plague everyday Americans. Like, who gives a shit whether or not Trump, is in office another day? Honestly, if Congress can get their shit together, they can override any veto that he would provide, and they could censure him or impeach him. So the hinge pin of everything that goes on in the government is Congress. If Congress had their shit together, they would have impeached Trump 6 months ago. Even he's a distraction first and foremost. So
he's a huge distraction. It's funny. I've been eyeballing Twitter, and he's speaking right now at a rally, and Fox is sending out tweet after tweet after tweet. It's really funny, quoting him like it's the most important thing in the world.
Well, yeah, because instead of looking at, hey, the DOD spending another fucking $1 trillion on the F-35, instead of looking at that, we're looking at fucking Stormy Daniels. That's the fucking problem that we're trying to get at. We're hacking at the roots of Stormy Daniels, and we're not talking about the prison industrial complex. We're not talking about the military industrial complex. We're not talking about the influence that pharmaceutical companies are giving to Congress people. That's the problem.
But Stormy Daniels may be his Achilles heel. So
who gives a shit about Donald Trump? I don't care about him. That's the point. Is he doesn't have any influence on my life. My congressperson does, and my congressperson is beholden to Pfizer. My enemy is Pfizer, not Donald Trump.
Well, you
really passionately don't care about him.
You could send your buddies in. I assume you're no longer in the military, Isaiah. I mean, he could send your buddies to a very unpleasant place.
And why is that? Because of the War Powers Act, which was passed by Congress, because they fucking dropped the ball. Because of the military industrial complex. Like, the president does not have the authority to declare war, but he has the authority to send troops into a place.
That's right.
For 60 days, and no congressperson is going to withdraw funding from those troops, lest they be said to be anti-military. So the entire premise of the War Powers Act is the problem here.
I personally
and that's legislation. That's Congress.
I personally think that it's okay for people to like distractions like Stormy Daniels and stuff, as long as they actually do still pay attention to like what you would view as the important stuff, because you could spend all of your time on the important stuff if you want to, and you might end up being ineffective if you're just always like caring about this shit, because it's a lot of stuff to care about. And also, like, some people are gonna be concerned with important shit, and some people are not going to be concerned with important shit, and they don't have to be concerned with important shit, because probably not everyone is going to, whether we want them to or not anyway.
Well, here's the problem with that. Like, the media has a responsibility to educate the voting populace. If your message, like, I'm going to take a stupid example I don't particularly like, because I've been reading the Hillary Clinton book, whatever. But one thing she highlighted was they spent 60 to 90% of news coverage, like partisan news coverage, on her emails. And her emails were pretty much inconsequential to public policy. Like, if we're trying to teach or inform Americans about what public policies are occurring, we can't force feed them these inconsequential things that don't matter. And I think that's what Isaiah is trying to get at with like the Stormy Daniels
I'm just saying.
or
I'm
any
just
of
saying that
these.
I'm just saying that they're not all bad. Like they're like I don't fucking pay any attention to this shit either. But I think that if people want to pay attention to it, it's not like what are we gonna do? Like, are we gonna make everyone pay attention to only important shit all the time? Then
Well,
what's the purpose of like
No,
a
that's
state?
not what I'm
what I'm
saying.
saying.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying either. It's the amount of attention being pointed to something that's inconsequential, and that's the problem.
Yeah, no,
If
no.
you,
I
if
totally
you have a
agree.
network that runs 24 hours of news and 80% of it is about Stormy Daniels while ignoring every single thing else, then you're not informing the voting populace about what policies, how certain policies are good or bad. You're
I
just
totally
making
agree.
them focus
I
on
totally agree
a
that
issue.
there's way too much attention or time spent on those things. Don't get me wrong. I totally agree about that.
Yeah,
I'm
but
not saying to completely remove these, the scandalous nature. I'm just saying there's too much importance being put on it to such an effect that people are laser focused on this Stormy Daniels and his infidelities over what laws are
But
affecting
again,
people.
the reason the Stormy Daniels story is potentially so consequential and could justify this amount of attention is because there's a lot of smart people who think she's more dangerous to Trump's future than the Mueller investigation is. Okay, based on the politics around the Mueller investigation, and at least for the time being, the Republicans control the House and the Senate, etc. So,
Well, the act itself hasn't moved evangelical Christians at all, so obviously it's not hurting him that much.
what a loathsome group. That's why I abandoned the right wing. Actually, I was a right winger for the first 20 years I followed politics.
and I
Were you
voted
a
Christian during that
libertarian.
time?
What?
Were you a Christian during that time?
No way, dude.
Were you always an atheist then?
Yes. I was interested in the historicity and the details of religions, and especially Christianity. But and I certainly went through a stage where I questioned whether or not these ideas could be grounded in fact. But I've made up my mind on all of that stuff for a long time. But the evangelicals, not to go off on it, I want to get back to this Stormy Daniels thing because this is important. The Mueller investigation, whatever they find out, unless there's a smoking gun that is so, no, there can't be a smoking gun as like there could be in the Stormy Daniels situation.
So Ed, let me postulate some hypotheses in front of you right now.
Yeah.
So let's say there was a House and Senate supermajority of Republicans right now, and Hillary Clinton was the president of the United States.
Yeah.
Would they move to try and impeach hypothetical President Clinton by hook or by crook?
For what?
Emails.
What emails? What do you mean?
Whatever. They could find something. I mean, she's been in politics for the past 50 years, so there's bound to be skeletons.
Lock her up.
No.
I would think that there is a likelihood that they would have either dug up or manufactured something to impeach her. Honestly, just being as cynical as I am, I think that's what would have happened.
I don't think so. That is a huge, dangerous thing to do.
It is.
And remember that, and we couldn't hold Congress in any lower esteem, as someone already pointed out. 16% approval rating. I'm surprised it's that high.
That was me. I pointed.
Yeah.
It was me.
We don't want this to devolve to whatever party's in the White House, whatever, right? The other party, if it controls the Congress, is constantly working on impeachment. It doesn't help anybody, and
I agree, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you cannot excise politics from the discourse, right? And that's the whole point of the Stormy Daniels. Is it's not about Stormy Daniels, and it's not about Trump per se. It's about the opposition to Trump. If there was not the widespread opposition to Trump, Stormy Daniels
this would be a non-story. It's a non-story. You're right. That's what makes
so what makes Stormy Daniels important?
Because of what you just said. She could be, that story could bring him down. Now, because we don't know the contents, we don't know what he did with Cohen, but we know the FBI has the files.
Does it matter if it's Stormy Daniels or something else?
Does it matter if? Yeah, it does matter.
Why?
Sure.
Why does it matter if it's Stormy Daniels or if it's collusion with the Russian government or if it's obstruction of justice? All these things are impeachable offenses, and the Congress has authority under the 25th Amendment to just remove the guy anyway.
Well,
will it be good? Will it definitely be good as an outcome if Trump gets brought down? Like, who's going to be in charge then, and will that be better?
President Mike Pence. Yay.
Like, is that going to be better?
Like, there is no better. We're between a rock and a hard spot, you know?
Mike Pence is a fucking religious zealot scumbag of the highest magnitude.
And this is why Congress is the most important branch of government. Because if you have a Congress that is dedicated to the Constitution and implementing the ideals of the U.S. experiment, as it were, then you don't have the overt influence of a theocrat like Mike Pence. He becomes a non-issue if you have a strong Congress.
Yeah, but our Constitution and our historical backstory is that there's a person at the top, right? So, like, I was going to ask Hunter.
No,
that's
not the case, though, because if you look at no, it's not, because if you look at the history of between 1865 and 1933, Congress was the most prevalent branch of government, and between 1945 and 1980, Congress was the strongest branch of government, even with the imperial presidency brought in by Harry Truman. So you have to look at the totality of history before you make assumptions about the U.S. political system.
Let me make my point. So, for example, in England, you have a prime minister. So the head of state is elected by the party that controls the lower house.
The head of state is the Queen of England.
That's a ceremonial role for a long time. So the prime minister of the head of state of Britain.
The head of state is the Queen of England by law. You have to look.
Also, the head of the church, but she doesn't fucking write papers about theocratic issues.
The leader of the government. Nomenclature is important. The leader of the government is the prime minister of the House of Commons. Yes.
Right. For all practical political matters, and that's not to say the Queen doesn't have de facto power there. Of course she does. And she has official power, as you just pointed out. I'm trying to draw a comparison. In the minds of the average man in the street or woman, in Britain, you don't elect the head of state. You elect the party who then nominates a head of state. So you don't know, right? So the Tories or the Conservative Party, I'm forgetting the names.
The Tories,
right? They control the House, and then they nominate someone within their party to be the head of state. That would never happen. Well, it would never happen here because our Constitution wouldn't allow it, obviously. But we like the idea of having a man at the top or a woman at the top.
That's partially true, but also partially not true. because there is a cult of the presidency, undoubtedly.
Right.
And it's the leader of the government, not the head of state. They're different. And you have to look at them differently, because the fact that the Queen of England is the head of state changes the role of formerly David Cameron, now Theresa May, effectually in how the government is run. Like the head of, like,
she's 92 years old. She doesn't.
Well, the head of state of Canada is still the Queen of England, and the leader of the government is what's his tits, fucking Justin Trudeau,
Justin Trudeau,
whatever the fuck.
I wish it was
pretty boy with pretty hair.
But the point is that these government systems are different than the ones that we have in the United States, and the way that we have it in the United States is supposed to be a diffusion of power aside from the executive branch. Like, the most important government official in your life should be your congressperson on the federal level, and the real most important person, if you're a family person, should be the school board representative for your district. That's who matters in your life more. Like the local sheriff is the person who influences your life more. So
all politics are local, as you said.
All politics are local. So what is the president of the United States? Why is there an inordinate amount of attention on the president of the United States, even when it was Obama?
Because of his power, whether real or imagined. And
what is the basis of his power?
He was elected. He holds tremendous sway. He gets more coverage.
The real basis is twofold. It's the bully pulpit, so he speaks from the heart of America. He is the spiritual leader of the cult of America. And he controls the real military might of the United States government. So he can enact an attack anywhere in the United States or anywhere around the world at any time, given circumstances. So that's an inordinate amount of power.
Mm-hmm. I would say also domestically, the president doesn't have that much power.
Accurate.
Like if you want to criticize foreign policy, go right ahead and attacking the president. But if it's like domestic issues, the president really doesn't have that much power at all.
Like why aren't railroads being repaired around the country, and why aren't bridges being repaired around the country? That's Congress, not the president of the United States. The president can suggest the budget. Congress is the one who passes it. Congress is the one who writes and passes the budget. So every dollar that's not being spent to fix a bridge over the Mississippi River is because of Congress, not the president.
That's true.
So
the president can't get any funding. All funding goes through Congress.
Exactly. So why are we paying so much attention to Stormy Daniels when there's bridges crumbling around the country? When there's huge holes in roads around the country?
Because his political enemies see an opportunity. That's why. And it's about sex.
And because infrastructure is not about sex.
Because it's not sexy.
Infrastructure is not sexy.
And incredibly expensive.
And Donald Trump isn't sexy either. It's a salacious story. So
and the guy's a germaphobe, and yet he banged a fucking porno star without a rubber on.
Well, who gives a shit?
He's also a scumbag.
He's a scumbag. Who's really surprised? We all know he's fucking corrupt and dirty and all that shit. Everybody who supports him is going to continue supporting him. Everybody who hates him is going to continue hating him. Stormy Daniels is just caught up in the fucking in the storm. The point of the matter is that none of this focus on Donald Trump is helping anybody in America at all.
I think the problem too is the media is becoming undistinguishable from the National Enquirer now.
Yeah, there's no real journalism being done on why bridges are fucking crumbling.
Well, a lot less. I don't know that there isn't. I think that the newsrooms have been gutted. I think we talked about this recently. I mean, But news organizations are making a comeback. I mean, I love when Donald Trump keeps saying the failing New York Times, and the New York Times has never been doing better.
Yeah, because everybody likes a good fight.
Because they're online. And their
They
subscription.
figured out how to fund their operation as well. So, all these completely free sites that are selling you ads, those are probably the most spurious.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think in summation, Congress is broken and the polls reflect it. Nobody likes Congress. That's like the one thing everybody can agree on in this country is that Congress sucks.
Yeah, it has a lower approval rating than the president does.
How do we fix Congress?
We gotta attack the economy of influence.
Bring back the guillotine. Yeah. I'd rather
corruption
not go French on it.
It's basically make corruption not an incentive.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a huge incentive right now. Like, was it 50% of
while you guys were talking, I looked up the corruption index, and the U.S. is 18th in the world. Denmark is number 1 with a 90 rating, and we're in the 70s. We being the U.S. Canada is above us. In other words, less corruption.
Well, I think the point isn't overt corruption. I think it is. The system itself is corrupt. People are playing within the rules, but the rules suck. The rules suck. So an overturning of Buckley. Oh, what? It's not Buckley v. Vallejo. It's Citizens United, and there's another one. There's another Supreme Court case that supports, corporations are people, and that money is speech. Both of those need to be fucking thrown out and overturned, and power needs to get put back in the hands of the people, which is on that point with Daryl. I agree completely. The power needs to be in the hands of the people, and the government should be beholden to the people alone. But the method through which that happens, I would disagree. And I would say that there need to be more Congress people so that the political power is more diffuse, and that my vote counts as much as the vote of somebody in Wyoming. And I think that corporations should be treated as corporations and not as people, meaning that their incentive structures are different than that of an individual and should be looked at differently than that of an individual, where legally right now they're not. And, a corporation can own a piece of property for 200 years and pay the same rate of tax, whereas a transfer rate from a father to son or from a mother to daughter of a piece of property gets taxed and reassessed because it's owned by an individual as opposed to a corporation. I was right. It was Buckley v. Vallejo. Thank you, learned hand.
The only thing that this is escalating is it's escalating that everyone's going to want to form a corporation to avoid certain things, and that's already happening. People.
Like I have an LLC for my recording stuff, for my music, so that I can write off the equipment I buy as tax write-offs. Because it's so fucking stupid. Like,
why are you playing the game, man? I know I'm not going to hate you. I'm going to hate the game.
I can't not. Because, I made in 2012 when Mitt Romney was running for president, right? He paid a total of 14% on his total income for the year of 2011, right? And he published his tax returns, and 14% was his total tax paid. You know how much tax I paid that year? 16%. I paid a higher rate of tax on my $30,000 that I earned as an E4 in the military than the candidate for the president of the United States. That's fucked. If you can't look at that and see that that's fucked from top to bottom, I don't know what to tell you. Then we live on two different planets. Like, people like Callan rail against paying 50% of their money in taxes, but they're paying 50%, and somebody who has 20 times as much money as him is paying 14%. Who's really fucking skimping out? Is it me, who's paying 16% at $30,000 a year, or is it Mitt Romney, who's paying 14% at $30 million a year? It's fucked. So how do we unfuck the system? You gotta start calling things what they are. Money is not speech. Money is money. Corporations are not people.
I agree. Like, if I bought a bunch of musical stuff, I'd definitely form an LLC to write it off.
Yeah, but my LLC only has me. I'm the only. It's a sole proprietorship, but because of legal fucking rigmarole, I have to form a fucking third party so that I could get loans on it too. And that helps me as a producer. Yeah, that's good. There are good aspects to having LLCs and these small corporations. But when somebody who makes, $3 million a year and has a sole proprietorship only to shuffle their money around in order to avoid taxes makes an LLC and are subject to the same rules as me as a sole proprietor fucking musician who's producing my own fucking shit, is that a fair system? Therein lies the problem. Like, are these rules fair? I don't think the rules are fair. I think the hand is stacked against, regular people like you and me. And, focusing on shit like gun control is distracting from the real issue. It is ultimately the point that I was trying to make earlier, is focusing on gun control or focusing on I don't know, all these other issues like transgender rights. Yes, transgender people should have the same rights as everybody else because this is fucking America and we're all Americans. 100%. But
except for Andrew.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
he lives in the 51st state.
Fuck Canada. Who cares about them? Anyway, they still have the Queen of England on their fucking paper money. Who gives a shit about them?
Yeah, we also have universal health care better than you.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly the point, is that you guys have a queen and universal health care. We have a fucking Congress, and people are going bankrupt for a head gash, a head wound. So
yeah, it sucks. I had to haggle with them. I haggled it down to $450, but even that's too much.
Free.
Yeah.
I remember the days when I first started working on Wall Street, if you were a single person working there, you got free health care, even though you had a private health care carrier, but working at a big firm, you didn't even have to pay because you were a single person. It was a benefit you got. Could you imagine that now?
Well, no, that's the law though. Like, individual healthcare,
no, it wasn't a law.
No, there's the Fair Labor Act of 1945 or 46 that makes it law that employers who employ people at certain levels have to pay for their healthcare, either through insurance or through direct payment. That's the law that was enacted before the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act itself is a little bit more complicated than that, and it's a fucking huge corporatist mess that I fucking hate. The Affordable Care Act is a fucking Ponzi scheme, honestly. And Hillary Clinton running on the Affordable Care Act was a fucking quagmire to begin with. Bernie Sanders would have won. That's besides the point.
What I liked about Sanders,
I mean, we should have a whole separate debate about healthcare, because
what I liked about Sanders is that at least he was consistent in his views. I mean, the guy was getting arrested in the 60s for sit-ins on civil rights. I mean, there's actual photos of the guy getting arrested at sit-ins. I mean, again, I don't know that I would have voted for him. I certainly would have voted for anybody other than Trump. So I guess I answered my question there, but
I voted for him in the primary. I voted for him. So
at least he was consistent.
yeah, he's not a fucking liar. But
he's a little he to make American industry the enemy. I mean, people work at those places. I mean,
they kind of are. They kind of.
I would have voted for him if his neck didn't start at his sternum. No, I'm just playing.
On that note, Dusty, we should wrap this up.
Wait, we have to do a current. We got to do a current events roundtable.
Well, what current event? We're not going to talk about Stormy Daniels.
We're talking about Congress. So if there's a current Congress event, then let's talk about it.
Well, I was going to bring up the beauty of Bill Cosby going to jail, hopefully.
Yeah, he's going to jail. We don't have to worry about that, I don't think.
I don't think he was going to rape anybody I know, so I think I'm good.
Well, I hope that was a joke.
It was, and also true.
It was funny because it's true.
How about him calling the prosecutor an asshole in the court?
Who gives a fuck? He's 80 years old and is going to die within the next 5 years in jail.
He referred to himself in the third person.
Who cares about Bill Cosby? He's old. He's going to die.
He's a serial rapist, and
he's going to die in prison.
And he's going to die in prison.
I hope you guys are right.
Might get raped in prison too.
Thank God for the
he's going to go to rich people's prison probably.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're probably right.
But he's going to die in prison.
No raping then maybe.
He's going to die in prison. Is it a good step? Is it a step in the right direction for America? Probably. You know, with
serial rapist, of course it is. It's the second most serious crime.
Yeah.
No, the second most would be if it were children.
I would say the second most serious crime is second-degree murder or treason.
Well, that's murder.
It depends. Treason is a big deal, man. Treason and desertion are both big deals. So if you're gonna put a hierarchy, maybe murder's number one. I don't know.
How about
what
happened?
I kind of think rape is worse than murder.
Well, and
no, it isn't.
I don't know. Okay, so if you were allowed to choose for yourself, would you rather be murdered or would you rather be raped?
All right, hold that thought. So, Dustin,
what?
We should add a moral philosophy mixed mental arts chats to the schedule so that we could discuss the veracity of whether or not rape is worse than murder.
Well,
I'd rather take it up the butt than get killed. That's all I'm saying.
Of course.
Really?
Yep. So let's.
I'd rather get killed.
Let's put that on the schedule.
Well, again, laws as they are now, there's a hierarchy, to use Jordan Peterson's favorite word, and I'm saying that with a fair amount of cynicism.
No, his favorite word is postmodern neo-Marxist.
His favorite word is lobsters. Anyway, so let's continue on. If you want to do current events, Ed.
I'm curious about what happened up in Toronto. Was this guy? Do we know why he did this? I mean, I know the guy doesn't have all his marbles. Andrew, are you familiar at all? I mean,
I'm not that familiar with it, to be honest.
I am very familiar.
Things.
So, I actually read the entirety of Elliot Rodgers' manifesto. I don't know if any of you guys did.
Nope.
All right. I did it because I really wanted to know about the psychology of somebody that would do something like that. So that's the reason why I read the manifesto. I was kind of amazed as well because the guy has ridiculous recall, I guess, for past events. But just reading that, it gave me insight into the current issue with the guy that ran over those people in Toronto. Elliot Rodgers basically had no friends, and he was like so socially awkward. He didn't know how to act in front of women, and I'm not saying he acted in a misogynist way in front of them, but he just did not know how to connect with them. So because of that, he formed a hatred of them because he. It's weird. There are some people that think there should be equality in dating, which of course is not true. Dating is a competition. So if you're failing at that competition, he was placing his hatred towards those who are winning. Um, and that's what that incel group is all about. If you heard about it, the involuntary celibates.
I heard about it only because of this guy in Toronto.
Well, it's existed for a while. Elliot Rodger was actually a part of that group
Is
as
it all
well.
men? It's what I don't understand.
Yes, it's all men. All
I
men.
was
There's
gonna
no
say,
female
men and women.
incels.
Why aren't they
No,
getting together?
Are they like men's rights activists?
no, because they're not. They're not advocating for men's rights. And all right, involuntary celibate. It just means that they can't get any. That's it. That's what
Why
it
Yeah, I
did
mean,
you
means.
imagine
broadcast that?
it's like, hey, I'm going to go join the small dick club. You know, like, why would you broadcast that?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
they don't really broadcast. So they join these communities anonymously, obviously.
Oh, they
And
do.
it's like an echo
Oh,
chamber
okay.
where people gripe about not being able to get laid.
Well,
Um,
well, I'm all for group support groups. That's a great thing. But why
but
wouldn't they?
the
Do they
problem with
actually?
this support group, well, it's not like a group wide thing. Of course, there's pockets. So I guess these guys got caught into pockets where instead of addressing their frustrations and trying to improve themselves, they just blamed the other sex for their inability to have sex. So it wasn't about self-reflecting on what they were doing wrong. It was because they were not being chosen, something was wrong with the women. So they went ahead and demonized these women, and they created some of the pockets created groups around demonizing the other sex because they weren't choosing them to be sexual partners.
Mhm.
You know, there's a bunch of layers too, because American society typically, prostitution's not legal, so there's no outlet there. There's
Is it legal in
also
Canada?
No.
yeah, so
Surprised.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
why?
it's illegal, it's also socially unacceptable.
It's because it's legal in Europe, or at least in England, it is.
Well, yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
well,
illegal.
Canada is kind of more of a combination between America and Europe than like more similar to Europe than America, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, so because of the outlaw of prostitution, it's also socially unacceptable. So
Right.
they see that route as not a route to take. Like they're very righteous about that, as if they're losing some type of battle if they were to partake in that. I know that was a big thing for Elliot Rodger after reading his manifesto. Um, but yeah, they're lonely. Like they don't have many friends. That's what I've gleaned off of his writings. So their only community is within these groups that are destructive. They're not really self-affirming. They're basically going and pointing their finger at something else as the problem. And that's kind of, the internet culture to allow ourselves to echo chamber ourselves and our own ideas. It's dangerous. And that's kind of what happened in this case. It's
Yeah.
basically the same as Elliot Rodger, but in Canada.
You bring up the echo chamber. It's something I think about a lot because we're all guilty of that. We love to have our own ideas echoed back to us because it's affirming, right? It's like a vicious circle. So I try to, like on Twitter, I have Fox News on there, and I have the Huffington Post on there, the other end of the spectrum. I really try to see what's important to both clans.
On Twitter, I follow like super far left people and super far right. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I follow people that they think like that are called alt-right, and I follow people that are like SJWs. So I don't try, like, I noticed that was a problem on YouTube. YouTube tends to stifle like what I would call recommended videos. I feel like its algorithm has put me in a place that if I wanted to explore like a different idea, it's very hard.
Really?
And that for YouTube, yeah, because YouTube,
What sort of different ideas?
well, YouTube, like if I'm watching recommended videos off of an issue, it's just gonna show me one side of the issue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like they don't recommend both sides; they just recommend one side. Like some algorithm probably pings me to be, etc. You know, political affiliation, so they only feed me one side. So that's kind of hard to get a totality of information, I'd say, on YouTube. But whenever I find like, I guess, moderate or centrist dudes, I always follow those guys because I know at least their stuff is going to pop up. And they usually reference far left and far right people. So I could also go off of whatever information they're referencing as well.
Yeah, usually in the suggested videos, like 9 out of 10 of them are really similar to the political view you just watched, and then there's that one that's different that you have to look really hard to find.
Yeah, so YouTube tends to rabbit hole people, that's for sure. And Twitter, you have to actively follow people. They do just suggestions, but um, they don't force feed you views that you're not following. So at least if you're listening to podcasts, you're hearing some interesting alternative views of things, you can find those people on Twitter and follow them. Unlike YouTube, which kind of force feeds you things. So yeah, the Toronto, I would call that guy Elliot Rodger Part 2. It's obvious we haven't addressed this problem, and it's not going to magically go away. So the problem I think too is it's not being looked at as a holistic problem. Like a lot of the media frames this issue as a problem of misogyny. So they just think they're just crazy misogynists, but there's kind of a whole totality to what actually brought them to that position in the first place. And I think that needs to be addressed, and it's a societal issue. I think the internet has compounded so many of the craziness that we see today. Like, I don't think if the internet didn't exist, I don't think we'd see this many school shootings. I'm not saying to take away the internet, but I'm saying the internet has also caused a lot of problems that people aren't really addressing, like acting out in crazy ways. World Star. People want to get into fights just so they can post it to a website where people can watch it. It's like this generation where everyone wants to be a superstar, even if it's for bad, a bad way to get there. Like, think of any reality star. What is it? The sex tape that gets them through the door. So I don't know. Fame is something that it's something that pervades America's society so much so that people are willing to do stupid shit to get there.
You have to seek out different sources so you don't put yourself into echo chambers like you guys do, right? Like, I feel like most people probably don't want to go to that much effort.
Yeah, and it takes a huge amount. Like today, I actually re-listened to Sam's podcast with Jonathan Haidt because I know that they clashed offline, and then they didn't speak for a while, and all this kind of stuff. And and I listened to, before that, I listened to something Haidt talked about Harris's views on religion, and I mean, I should do a video on it. I have to get back to my Sam's Bulldog videos because, of course, he got just about all of it wrong, and changed the subject, and it was, I mean, it wasn't Jordan Peterson level of silliness by a long shot, but you know, and I find myself reflexively defending Sam instead of doing my homework. And, you know, I said, you know what, let me go back and listen to this. And they had a very cordial, they talked about their disagreement. They talked about how they didn't talk for a while, and that's kind of bullshit. So Sam invited them on the podcast, and they discussed their differences, and it was elucidating. I mean, the guy's got a lot to offer, and this we versus them, it's just not the way to go, because no one's got all the answers, and it's the intellectual adversary that is going to push your guy around and make him defend his views more, not Sam's Bulldog, right? I mean, I have this persona, right, that I try to put up on YouTube or whatever, but and I've said it 1,000 times on my own videos, like, it's not even about Sam Harris, it's about the ideas. And I, you know, but I try to catch myself. He's so persuasive to me. He talks like I wish I could talk, frankly. He communicates like I wish I could communicate. That I find him so persuasive. And just having the ability to be persuasive itself is a skill that you can get, you can fall in love with, right? And you can find yourself being in one camp and not doing your homework. So anyway, I listened to that podcast again, and the guy's totally reasonable. I mean, he believes in this. I got to look into this. You guys have spoken to it in the past, about it in the past. He's about this group selection thing that he signs on, and I'm trying to remember the name of the biologist who wrote that book.
Robert Sapolsky?
No, the other guy. It doesn't matter. But anyway.
David Sloan Wilson?
Yeah, Wilson, exactly, dude. And I mean, it's not a popular idea and all the rest of it, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. And it's, you know, being able to persuasively argue against your detractors is what it's all about. And being able to defend your ideas. And how are you going to do that if you can see that these group of intellectuals, they kind of travel in a herd, right? I mean, you've got what's his name from Harvard who just came out with the book? Oh, Pinker. You've got Pinker and Harris and Dawkins and Dennett.
The new atheists.
Yeah, the new, right. But and then their little offshoots, and they all speak together and book their own speech. And then you've got what's his name in England, the gay conservative guy.
Milo Yiannopoulos?
No.
Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray.
Oh yeah, those are two very different people.
Yeah, and they all sell each other's books and blurb each other's books, and that's fine. I mean, whatever. It's the way things are done. And Gad Saad, and they're all propping each other up and all criticizing the same group of people. And I look at these chats like sports. I mean, there's probably a chat going on right now on YouTube where people are talking about the NFL draft, which is fine and everything. I've been watching the NFL for a long time, but it's still just sports. It's inconsequential.
It's intellectual sparring.
Yeah, it's a much more fun way to debate whether or not are the 27 Yankees the best team ever? Well, those are like bar arguments, and there's nothing wrong with them or whatever. But I find the intellectual stuff more fun.
All right. Well, actually, let's see. Yes. All right. So I would say that if anyone would like to try something, this is something I do pretty much every day, is I take positions opposite of, say, a hardline ideological position, and I always argue the opposite of that position. Like, even if I don't agree with it, I would say try that. It'll definitely open your mind up to have empathy with positions you normally would not. And I do this on a daily basis. Well, I wouldn't say daily, but I always argue with people. I wouldn't say, I guess, devil's advocating. I do that quite a bit, but
That's
I
steel
really,
manning instead of straw manning.
well, I guess, but it's not my position that I'm fortifying, and it's
Yeah,
not
I
the
know. No,
position of it's not the position of the person that I'm arguing with either. It's opposite of theirs.
no, like a steel man argument is like the opposite of a straw man argument in the sense that you say your opponent's position in such a defensible way that it's almost inevitable to be true before you offer your own position. But I guess if you're just defending the other side, that's different.
Yeah, that's me just taking the other side, even if I'm not with the other side.
Yeah, what Sam has said many times, and I totally agree with, is if you're discussing subject A with someone whose views you differ with, you should be able to summarize that person's views in a way that they would approve. I mean, that is vital. And you can tell oftentimes, I mean, Jordan Peterson is the perfect example, who can't do that. Okay. There's many others. And Dusty, the exercise you just said is a way to do that. I mean, this is what goes on in debate clubs where you don't know which side of the debate you're going to have to be on in the debate. That seems a little odd to me, but it's a way to make sure that you understand. Everybody should, if you're going to argue a point, you should understand the other side's point of view in a way that they would approve of. It's really that simple. And you know, what you see in the media is a profound lack of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to end it, because we've gone on for a while, my homework assignment for all of you listening out there is check someone who is taking an extreme partisan position and argue the opposite of that, even if you do not believe in the opposite position. I tell people to do this, one, because it's if you're not part of that partisan position that you're arguing for, you could bridge a gap between the two positions to see that both positions are ridiculous. That's basically what I do.
Well said.
But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining our congressional conversation. I'll go ahead and allow you guys to plug anything you need. Go ahead, Isaiah.
Buy my record, Great Ghouls in the Soulless. The last record's called Pain and Suffering. It's available on Google Play and Bandcamp. Bandcamp.com/greatghouls. My website is greatghouls.com. I do all the audio and all the music for the Mixed Mental Arts podcast. Yeah. So the intro music for Mixed Mental Arts since January has been my creations. What else? Listen to the fucking podcast, guys. Give us money on Patreon. Seriously.
Yes.
Seriously.
All right, Andrew, do you got any plugs?
Yeah, there's my my YouTube channel, Mindgasms Andrew Meitzer, and there's my blog, mindgasms.theblogpress.com, and then I'm on the social medias, the Twitter and the Facebook Ibuha, Andrew Meitzer, and my last name is a weird German spelling, Meintzer. Yes, I said Z Isaiah, the Canadian way. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, great. Ed, aka Sam's Bulldog, got any plugs? How can people find you?
They can find me on YouTube. I am Sam's Bulldog on YouTube. Check my channel out.
And you got a Twitter account, right?
Oh, I do. Yes, I do. I tweet fairly often, actually. And I'm also Sam's Bulldog on Twitter. What is it? Edward M. Kennedy 2. I actually need to check that. I'm sorry. Sam's Bulldog at Edward M. Kennedy 2 on Twitter.
All right, great. And all of my plugs are going to be MMA plugs. So make sure you guys donate to the Patreon. It helps keep this machine running. Also, visit our website at mixedmentalarts.online. If you like to do a lot of Amazon shopping, we do have an affiliate link you can click through on the bottom of our page. And guess what? You can also bookmark that page, so you don't even have to visit our site every time you want to use it. So bookmark our affiliate link, shop through Amazon, and that helps us out. Also, we have a Facebook group, lots of chatter about current events and big philosophical ideas. If you ever want to get down and dirty with our idea sex death matches, come join our Facebook group, and you can do that by typing in Mixed Mental Arts into the Facebook search bar. We also have a Facebook page. Like the page, and make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. If you see that little bell next to the subscribe symbol, that is very important. Make sure you click on the little bell, and that'll tell you, I think it'll give you, I think a 60-minute heads up when we do these live streams. And if we produce any more video content, it'll give you a little alert to let you know, hey, look, there's a new Mixed Mental Arts video. Check it out. It'll tell you. All right. We also have a Discord channel. I will provide that link later since it's a bunch of letters and numbers. I don't want to say right now because nobody's going to remember those. And make sure you check out our Twitter and Instagram pages. Those will be at Mixed Mental Arts. And my personal Twitter is at Wokecentrist. I don't use it too often, but I try to tweet once a day at least. There's just so much social media. It's hard to dedicate lots of time to that stuff, even though I spend way too much time on the Mixed Mental Arts Facebook group. All right, fellas. Well, thank you very much for participating. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you for watching. Have a great evening.